Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
Tommy Illman was only 7 years old when his parents bought the house on Tamara Lane. Though it was no mansion by any stretch of the imagination, the 5-bedroom raised ranch-style home seemed like a palace compared to the 1-bedroom studio apartment he and his parents had lived in prior. His dad loved to brag about the size of the new house. He said that it even had a finished basement. I thought the whole house was finished, Tommy said, confused by the term. His father laughed. Yes, Tommy, he replied. The whole house is finished. It just means the basement is set up to use as an activity room, a den, or even bedrooms. Tommy gasped. You mean I have to sleep in the basement? This idea clearly upset him, and his protest continued until his mother interrupted. Of course not, sweetie, she assured him in a low, soothing tone. You can pick which room you want as yours. His eyes lit up. Before he had a chance to respond, he was cut off by his dad. Except the master bedroom. Tommy let out a disapproving humph. He hated that his father always seemed to know what he was thinking. He figured that was just one of the perks of being a grown-up. As they stepped through the front door, Tommy squealed with delight. He dashed off through the living room, into the kitchen, and down the main hall to look at the rooms. Though the size of the master bedroom was impressive, he was equally satisfied with the other 2 rooms on the main floor. He returned to the hall and pointed at a door that sat just off of the kitchen. What's that? Is it the basement? His dad nodded. Tommy turned the knob and slowly opened the door. He was greeted by a wooden staircase that plunged downward into a dark, wide-open room. He turned to his parents, fear painted across his innocent face. It's okay, just turn on the light. The switch should be on the left wall. Show me your left. Tommy lifted his left hand slowly. His parents smiled and nodded encouragingly. He slowly slid his hand along the wall until he felt the switch. With a click, the light above the stairs came on, forcing the darkness to retreat. Tommy gave a weak smile and carefully began to descend the stairs. The basement was much larger than he expected, and far less scary with the lights on. The main room was the length of the entire first floor, big enough to run around in or even play a game of tag. 2 bedrooms sat against one of the longer walls, with a small half-bathroom between them. As Tommy marveled at the size of the basement, he was startled by loud footsteps on the stairs behind him. I thought the basement was supposed to be finished, his mother said with disappointment in her voice. The walls are just bare cinder block, and the floor isn't even carpeted. Only the main room needs carpeting. The bedrooms are carpeted, and the bathroom is ready to go. And I like cinder block walls, because of a certain vibe, his father responded, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. His mother scoffed. Yeah, like a dungeon. Tommy laughed. Sure, the concrete floor and gray cinder block walls weren't exactly homey, but the space definitely made up for it. Tommy peeked his head into one of the small rooms. I like it down here, he said excitedly. Can this be my room? His parents looked at him with a mixture of confusion and shock. Come on, he pleaded. This room can be my bedroom, and this one can be like a game room, Tommy explained, walking through the adjoining bathroom. I'm a big boy now, and this way I can make noise and play video games and have friends over and practice karate and... His parents started chuckling. His mother gave him a comforting smile. Okay. If you really like it, then I guess we can give it a shot. If you change your mind, we can always move you to an upstairs room. Tommy gave his mom and dad a big hug. "Hey," Tommy began as he looked toward the far corner of the main room. "What's that?" He pointed his tiny index finger at a large rebar grate in the floor. His dad walked over to it and peered inside. Looks like an old drainage gate. Bone dry in there now. Must have been used to drain water from the basement during the construction, before it flood-proofed. Don't worry, though. Realtor said they sealed it up real good, like a submarine. Tommy giggled. He loved submarines and boats. With a thumbs up, his dad reassured him this would be the best room in the house. That first winter was very trying for both Tommy and his family. Repeated snowstorms brought over 5 feet of snow and temperatures that dipped well below zero. Of course, these conditions bothered his parents much more than they did him. Even though he couldn't play outside due to the winter advisory that was in effect, the schools were closed and he got to stay in and play video games with his neighbor and new best friend, Ryan Fisher. He was slightly older than Tommy, and though the age difference was only by a couple of months, Ryan loved to rub it in Tommy's face. However, Tommy didn't pay attention to any of his teasing. In fact, he thought this behavior only showed that even though Ryan was older, he wasn't any more mature. "So, what made your parents buy a haunted house?" Ryan asked, never taking his eyes off the video game they were playing. "What do you mean, haunted? It's not haunted," Tommy protested, having lived in the supposed haunted house for several months. Ryan shrugged, eyes still glued to the TV screen. "Well, people say it's haunted. They say the last guy who lived here liked to lure kids down to the basement with candy. Then he'd kill and eat them. They say he killed himself when he heard the police coming to get him and..." "Boo!" Ryan shouted and lunged at Tommy, causing him to let out a high-pitched yelp and drop his controller. He punched Ryan in the arm and began using words that would surely get him grounded if his mother heard him say them. That night at the dinner table, Tommy decided to break the usual silence with his newfound information. "Ryan says our house is haunted." His parents stopped eating and waited for him to continue. "He says a bad man used to live here and he ate kids in the basement." Naturally, his parents were mortified at what the neighborhood kids said about their house. "Sweetie," his mom said, placing a hand on his arm, "that's just a scary story the neighborhood kids made up to frighten you. The house isn't haunted, and no one that lived here ate people. Isn't that right, dear?" Tommy's dad nodded in agreement. "That's right. The realtor said the house had been foreclosed after the original owner had passed away." Tommy gasped at the thought of someone dying here. "It's okay, T. The realtor said he was an old man. It was just his time to go. Nothing to be scared of." Tommy believed his parents, but still felt uneasy about the house, especially the basement. "Can I move my room to one of the upstairs rooms?" he said, with a hint of fright in his voice. His parents nodded and told him he could use the guest bed until they moved his things up from the basement. When the spring came, the warm weather brought more than the usual birds, flowers, and insects. The enormous snow mounds that had built up over the previous winter had melted into a deluge of water, causing Tommy's entire street to flood. It was then that he and his family found out their finished basement would not live up to its title. One afternoon, as Tommy opened the basement door to get his skateboard and helmet, he found himself staring at several feet of water instead of the bottom of the staircase. The water was dark, smelled of mildew, and appeared thick and viscous. "Dad!" Tommy yelled down the hall. "The basement's flooded!" Tommy's dad came running down the hall. When he saw the swamp that sloshed lazily at the base of the stairs, he unleashed a tirade of swears and curses directed at no one in particular, save maybe the basement itself. Tommy's mom rushed in when she heard the yelling and told her son to go play outside while they got the situation sorted out. He agreed and quickly hurried out to the yard to play. Thankfully, he'd moved his bedroom upstairs when he did. After several days of plumbers, home inspectors, and insurance agents coming and going, coupled with his father yelling at what he called the rat bastard realtor, the basement was finally water-free. The inspector told Tommy's parents the original seal had been a slapdash job, and that the new seal should keep the water out for the coming years. Before he left, he cautioned they might experience some mold issues, but to give them a call and they'd send someone out to handle it. They thanked him and the rest of the workers for doing a quick job and hoped that that would be the end of it. Not long after the flooding and repairs, Tommy was woken from a sound sleep by a faint scratching noise at his bedroom door. He quickly snapped on his bedside light and looked all around his room. He was alone, but the scratching sound persisted. He slowly crept out of bed and placed his ear near the heating vent in the carpet. It was then he realized it wasn't scratching he was hearing. It was whispering. "Tommy!" The voice rasped like the sound of dry leaves scraping on pavement. "Tommy! Please! Come down here. I want to meet you." Tommy was frozen with terror. He mustered all of his courage to respond. Who are you?" he asked, voice trembling. The whispering returned. "I'm a genie," the voice lied. "I was trapped down here until the water set me free. I've so wanted to meet you and your family. I've listened to you for months, hoping I'd be set free so I could grant you wishes." Tommy's uneasiness began to wane. "Come downstairs so I can grant you wishes." Tommy grabbed his flashlight and made his way down the hall. He carefully approached the basement door. He reached out with his tiny hand, placed it on the knob, and slowly opened the door. As the hinges squealed and groaned, the batteries in his flashlight died. Tommy let out an audible yelp, then quickly cupped his free hand over his mouth. He peered into the inky blackness of the basement, too scared to descend the stairs or even reach for the light switch on the wall. In the darkness, he swore he saw shapes moving at the base of the stairs. As his eyes adjusted, the shape appeared to be a person, swaying back and forth like a tree caught in a light breeze. Tommy swallowed hard as the shadowy figure lazily lolled from side to side. Then the unthinkable happened. The shadow took a step. Tommy screamed as the figure moved slowly up to the next step, still swaying side by side. Without warning, the light above him flashed on and the shadow had vanished. "Tommy!" His dad's voice boomed from behind him. Tommy screamed and quickly turned to face him. "What are you doing out of bed, son?" Tommy was taking increasingly deep breaths. He raised his arm and pointed to the bottom of the stairs, not daring to turn and face what might still be lurking below. His father looked past him and gave an exasperated sigh. Tommy turned to see what was wrong and why he wasn't running in terror. On the wall at the bottom of the stairs was a large black stain. "Great, just what we needed." His father let out another sigh. "Mold. Come on, Tommy, get back to bed. We'll deal with this in the morning." As Tommy followed his father back down the hall, he glanced back, filled with dread. His father didn't see it, but he did. The mold wasn't only on the wall. There were 2 dark stains on the 2 bottom stairs as well. The next day, Tommy told Ryan what had happened. "Dude, you're full of crap," Ryan exclaimed. "That story I told you is something we all tell the new kid to scare them. There's no ghost or genie or whatever in your basement. The old dude that lived here just croaked. Don't be such a baby." "It's true," Tommy argued back. "I can prove it." Tommy walked with Ryan over to the basement and swung the door open. "What do you call that?" Tommy asked, triumphantly pointing to the dark spot on the wall. "Mold, you dingus. All of the houses have it after flooding." Tommy pointed his finger at the stairs. "What about those footprints? Explain that," Tommy said, challenging his assertion. Ryan shook his head slowly. "Still just mold, dude." Tommy was starting to get angry. His parents hadn't believed his story either, and dismissed the shadowy creature as a nightmare. Ryan flicked on the overhead light and started down the stairs. "Come on, Tommy. Let's find this basement genie." Before Tommy could stop him, Ryan had already disappeared into the basement. Tommy quickly caught up with his friend, who was now standing in the far corner near the drainage gate. Ryan gestured at the floor surrounding it. Dark, greenish-black spots encircled the small opening and the surrounding walls. "See, dude? Mold. It sucks, but it's just mold." Before Tommy could argue, the two of them were startled by a loud bang. The basement door had swung shut. Tommy ran back to the steps to see if maybe one of his parents had accidentally closed it, not knowing they were down there. But before the word "Mom" could escape his lips, the basement light blew with a sharp pop. "Come on, Tommy. This isn't fun." "Ah!" Ryan's words were cut short by a blood-curdling scream. Tommy squinted in the darkness, too frightened to move from the base of the steps. He stared at the far corner as an unimaginable fear washed over him in waves. Even without the light, he could make out the horrible scene that was unfolding before him. The shadowy figure had returned and was wrapped around Ryan, only this time it looked far less human than the night before. Numerous limbs, claws, and tendrils groped, slapped, and squeezed his friend until the screaming stopped. Tommy saw the shadows lower his friend's limp body to the floor. "Tommy!" The shadows whispered. "I'm still hungry, Tommy!" The dark mass shambled toward him, twitching and chuckling. "Will you feed me, Tommy? Will you bring me more food?" Tommy began to sob. He knew that this was the end. He knew this creature would squeeze the life out of him like it did Ryan. Then it would get his parents. He closed his eyes and braced himself. "What the hell are you kids doing down here?" His father yelled from the stairs, flashlight in hand. "Didn't I say it wasn't safe to be down here because of the mole?" He didn't finish his sentence. Tommy's dad cupped a hand over his mouth. His tears began to form in his eyes. "Oh, my God, Ryan! Tommy, what happened? What did you do?" The shadows had retreated once again. Tommy ran to his father and wrapped his arms around him, hot tears stinging his eyes. "It was the mold, Dad! It was the mold!" The coroner's report had ruled Ryan's death an accident. They said it appeared he had suffocated from an intense allergic reaction from the mold spores in the Yeoman's basement. They said that situations like this were rare, but not unheard of in young children. Ryan's parents, however, did not accept this explanation. Instead, they took their sadness and frustration out on Tommy and his family. "This is all his fault," Ryan's mother screamed through tears, pointing an accusatory finger at Tommy. "That little bastard did something to him. He's sick. Your whole family is sick." Mr. Fisher tried to calm his wife down, but the same pained, judgmental look lingered on his face. "Honey," he began. "Not here, not like this." Ryan's closed casket sat a few feet away on a small, white altar adorned with flowers, stuffed animals, and photos of the now-deceased boy. Tommy hid behind his parents and burst into tears, his small voice trembling. "It was the mold monster, Miss Fisher." Tommy struggled to get the words out. The sudden loss of his new best friend gripped him in fear and anxiety that would not shake loose. Mrs. Fisher approached the omens, hatred and pain in her eye. The only monster is you. Get out. Out. With that, the funeral director approached the omens and firmly asked them to leave. After Ryan's funeral, things only got worse for Tommy and his parents. The voices and shadows had stopped, but his fear of their return kept him awake most nights. One evening, when he should have been sleeping, he heard his parents arguing in the living room. Tommy's mother wanted to sell the house and move. "We can't stay here," she pleaded. "The mold is dangerous and Tommy's terrified. His best friend died down there." His father met her concerns with anger. "We can't just leave. We've sunk so much money into this goddamn house. And who's going to want to buy it after a little boy just died here, huh? I had that basement cleaned best I could, and I filled the damn drainage grate with cement. What more do you want from me?" "What about our son?" she screamed. "Don't you care about him? He won't sleep. He barely eats. He won't even go near the basement. He's traumatized." Tommy's dad paced back and forth, hands covering his face. Fine. Then take him to therapy. Get him some help. He's obviously all screwed up. I told him not to play in that damn basement. You do whatever you want, but I'm not leaving." His mother grabbed her coat and stormed down the hall to Tommy's room. "Get up, sweetie," she said, lightly shaking Tommy's shoulder. "We're going to go stay with Aunt Linda and Uncle Steve." Tommy slipped on his shoes, took his mother's hand, and the two of them drove off into the night. Tommy didn't see much of his father after that fight. He and his mother stayed with his aunt and uncle until they were able to find an affordable townhouse. For the first few years after his parents separated, his father would come and visit a few times a year, but the constant bickering with his ex-wife made the visits less and less frequent until one day they stopped altogether. Tommy attended therapy at the behest of his mother and school guidance counselor to help cope with what he had witnessed in the basement. After years of therapy, he eventually came to terms with Ryan's death being a freak accident caused by severe anaphylactic shock. True, he still had his fears of basements, sewer grates, and mold, but he tried not to let it interfere with his day-to-day life. The visions and voices all seemed to vanish the night he and his mother left that moldy old house. Now, 18, Tommy had decided to leave the townhouse he and his mother called home for the past 11 years and rent his own small place in the city. His new apartment was barely bigger than the living room of the townhouse that he just left, but it was closer to campus, and he could even walk to work if he had to. One evening, he was just getting in from work, and the weather took a terrible turn. Rain had been hammering down for hours, the gutters below Tommy's apartment filled with rushing water and debris. This type of weather always made him anxious. Thunder boomed just above, shaking his windows. He closed his eyes and tried to tell himself it was just a storm. As the noise from the growing storm raged on, his mantra was broken by the sound of his cell phone. The phone jiggled to life with a number he didn't recognize. Tommy nervously pressed the accept button. "Hello?" Tommy speaking. There was a pause. He heard someone on the other end breathing heavily. "Tommy, it's Dad. I know it's been a long time since we last spoke, but I heard you moved to your own place and we're going to college, and I just wanted to see how you were." Tommy sat silent for what felt like an eternity. There were so many things he wanted to say to him, wanted to shout at him. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes. "I'm fine, Dad, thanks. Been keeping busy. Work, school, you know?" He heard his dad chuckle on the other end. It had been so long since he'd heard his father laugh that he forgot how soothing it could be. "You sound so big now, T. I'm sorry I let time get away from you like that. I should have been there for you, and I wasn't. I hope I can make it up to you, son. Anyway, I have some news for you that you might like to hear. I know how much you hated that old house after your friend Ryan passed away. Well, I just heard from our old realtor that they tore it down to make way for condos or something like that. Isn't that great? Tommy felt his heart sink. Tore it down? Even the basement? Tommy asked, fear causing the hairs on the back of his neck to prickle. Yeah, even the basement. Great, right? Before Tommy could respond, his living room light flickered and went out. The room filled with a wet, rotted odor as the vague shadows began to shift around him. Dad, Tommy nervously whispered into the receiver. They let it out. They broke the cement in the grate, and they let it out, Dad. His eyes darted around the room, phone still pressed to his ear. The silhouette seemed to dance and weave with every move he made. Tommy, calm down, okay? We've been over this. There's nothing in that basement that can't hurt you. His father's words were cut short. He pulled the phone away from his ear. The screen was blank, dark, dead. Panicked, he bolted for the front door. Tommy! Where are you going, Tommy? The whispered voice of the shadows asked from just in front of his only means of escape. Something was different this time. This time the shadows had more than one voice, and speaking in unison. Ryan? Ryan, is that you? Tommy choked out between stunted breaths. We're hungry again. Tommy. We haven't eaten in years. You're going to feed us, Tommy. You're going to feed us. The engulfing darkness slithered through the air, wrapping Tommy in their damp embrace. The stench of mold and decay filled his nose. The inky blackness wriggled and squirmed in and out of his mouth. The shadows blanketed his eyes and filled his ears, until all fell dark and silent. Tommy's father came bursting through the front door of the small apartment. He knew he hadn't been the best dad, but he had to see what had happened to his son when he heard the panic and fear in his voice. He needed to be sure that everything was going to be okay. But it wasn't okay. Nothing was okay. In the small beam of light that trickled into the apartment from the outside hall, he saw the lifeless form of what used to be his little boy sprawled on the floor. He rushed over and held his son's body in his arms. Silent, weak sobs escaped him as he rocked back and forth, trying to make sense of what could have happened since they last spoke 3 hours ago. The door to the apartment slowly creaked shut, extinguishing what little light the hall had offered. A damp, moldy smell crept into the room. Tommy's father began to choke and cough on the noxious odors that now seemed to surround him. He raised his head and peeked over the shoulder of his son's corpse. On the other side of the room, the shadows bobbed and weaved from side to side. The squirming mass of darkness lolled toward him. Dad, we're hungry.
It's hard to trust anyone after what happened. But knowing that the public will not be informed about the truth has me worried beyond belief. Maybe because it's all too far-fetched. Hell, I don't know. I suppose I should be careful with what I say. But I now know something that was obviously intended to be kept a secret. I don't exactly know how deep these people have their hands in everything. But after I share this with you here, I'm sure someone will be sent to track me down and erase me from existence. Someone is always watching. However, after everything that happened, I don't really fear that, or even death right now. Because there's something else out there that is much more horrifying than simply taking your last breath. I need to tell anyone I can, anyone that will listen, about everything that happened when I was a security guard for this steel mill. After I'm finished with this, I will submit my knowledge to a news station, but I've decided to share information here that is a bit more descriptive. It should go without saying that some identities will be protected. Security guards usually call fellow guards by last name, but I think I should be careful anyways. Let me tell you a bit about myself. You can just call me D. After being hospitalized from a couple gunshot wounds from active duty, I was honorably discharged with compensation packets. Being hit with the pain and a quick depression, I never wanted to commit to anything other than occasionally attempting to work out and get through the pain. I was gaining extra weight, hated the idea of counseling, and thought about getting a dog. But my pain subsided enough for me to finally say enough was enough. I was losing money and it was time to get a job. So I put in several applications online to become a security guard or anything that welcomed my background in the military. Stick to what you know, right? For years I made my way through the world of being a security guard, with the occasional aches and stiffness, and guarded all sorts of off-limit areas, government facilities, banks, offices, factories, you name it. Some employers welcomed my license to carry a firearm. Try not to lean towards jobs like that. But when the money's right, the money's right. So becoming more comfortable in the field of being both an armed and unarmed security guard, I sort of made a name for myself and would eventually do my own freelance work for various companies in private security. Some people paid top dollar to guard things that even I had no true knowledge of what it could be. Those jobs usually came with signing NDAs. And I won't lie though, I enjoyed the feeling some of those jobs gave me, especially the ones needing people with the experience I have just to keep their eyes peeled for armed intruders and to fire on sight, like I was in some action movie where Arnold Schwarzenegger would pop out and start a gunfight. On regular security jobs, you are not permitted to take another person's life and use deadly force. But for private security, things can get more serious. This particular job, after a while, became very much like that, but far, far worse than I could ever imagine. I was contacted by a company, obviously I will not be naming, to guard multiple buildings for both day and night shifts. The area itself was barren, with a patch of forest to the south of the facility, and owned property lines fenced off and marked with no trespassing signs surrounding the zone for miles. There was a total of 6 buildings to guard, buildings A through F, with A being the closest to the parking lot. Railroad tracks were behind 2 main operating buildings that were labeled C and D. Building A was where they assembled parts, and a conveyor belt ran all the way through to Building C to deliver scrap. Buildings A and B were opposite each other, and by them was a trailer for workers, our guard building, and a yard for trucks to load supplies with dumpsters and a shed for maintenance. Opposite that was the parking lot and our main gate, with a guard that seemed to be there 24/7. We can just call him Phil. Buildings E and F were used for housing supplies, and Building B was basically empty, save for some discarded equipment. The building itself was constructed farther away from the other ones. There were 4 windows in the guard's office, and one that allows you to see the gap between B and A. I didn't really know what the building was used for, but I actually enjoyed guarding this place for the 9 months I was there. Until they asked me to sign some documents in the guard's building, then everything spiraled straight into a nightmare. The day started out like any normal day. I don't like being early or late, so I showed up right as my shift was about to start, as always. It was the day shift, and I was greeted by Phil, showed him my ID card, and was cleared to enter. I then pulled into the parking lot, got out, headed for the guard's office. Looking around, I noticed 2 nondescript vehicles parked on the dirt road where deliveries would be, with traffic cones placed by one of the vans. Must be some inspectors, I thought. Once I made my way closer to the guard's office and glanced over at Building B. There was a group of men with jumpsuits and respirators gathered around the front of it. They were installing a card reader on the main entrance doors, but the actual door was gone. Walking a bit closer, I then noticed the welding machine. Trailing behind the other men, there was an industrial and very expensive-looking hand truck being pushed and supported by 3 more of them near the opening. It was carrying a brand new, heavily reinforced door. That was definitely something you don't see every day. Shaking off the weird feeling I got from seeing that, I swiped my key card and opened the guard's office door, noticing I had guests seemingly waiting for my arrival. The man in charge of all operations, Sam, was with 2 people in black suits standing near the surveillance station. I rarely see this guy ever. I then noticed an extra monitor was installed as well, watching those men outside install the new door. One of the suited men held a packet of paper, and the other guard assigned with me, we'll call him Ray, was already sitting down by one of the windows opposite them. "What's this all about?" I asked Sam. "It's all right. Just go ahead, clock in, then sit down, please," Sam told me, trying to sound polite. And I looked over at the 2 men before stamping my time card and sitting down in a chair. The 2 men looked at each other, and the one on the left took a step forward.
"A pleasure to meet you. How are you doing today?"
He asked in a tone that did not sound friendly in the slightest, monotone and emotionless. He extended his hand in greeting. "Fine." I shook the man's hand, and he continued.
"I am Special Agent Franks, and this is Calloway. We represent Optimal Solutions in a collaborative operation with the United States government to store supplies and other materials that may be hazardous if mistreated."
He set down a stack of papers on the metal desk nearest me.
"You can read about us in that packet if you'd like. We need to occupy Building B for a period of time since it is not operational here. The area will be disinfected, and anything we work on will be contained inside the warehouse. We apologize for any inconvenience."
He paused, probably to see my reaction. "Okay," I said, picking up the sheets of paper and skimming the details about this subcontracting medical research group while listening.
"I understand this may seem unusual and on short notice for your security guard stationed here. We've already spoken with Sam, and he has allowed us access to the building."
He paused again and put his hands on his hips.
"Now, the work we do is not only important, but it is crucial we are in a secure location. I would like to explain a few things. Is that all right?"
He asked the 2 of us guards, and I glanced over at Ray. Ray shrugged and spoke.
"I'm already here. Just get on with it."
I nodded my head in agreement and looked back to Franks, handing him the packet of papers.
"Due to this particular work study, the identities of people involved and the nature of the work is considered highly classified, and any information about this cannot be disclosed to the public. I am sure you've already gathered that we are installing a reinforced door over at Building B. We are asking that you include this area in your perimeter checks during daytime. At night, we will be stationing armed men under our direct payroll by those doors. Watching over the camera feed is only required for you then, but you will be given our frequency to speak directly to us on those devices. No one besides us should be allowed access. That door will be used for our personnel only. We are going to be staying within the compound throughout the time we are here. Military rations have been issued and workers' quarters are currently being installed. No one gets in and no one is permitted to leave the premises until we have completed the work or have been given authorization. We have already installed another camera watching that area as well, so it can be easier for you to keep watch while fulfilling your other duties.
He pointed out the monitor. Ray spoke up.
Damn. I don't suppose we aren't getting paid more for this crap? Keeping quiet and all that?
He asked, chuckling. That was one thing I liked about Ray. We would always be on the same tip with money, because I was just about to ask the same thing. He just had the balls to ask first.
Your time and service for all of this will cause a substantial increase in your already agreed upon payment arrangements. If you do not wish to participate, you are free to leave, but you will not be able to return to this area once we have occupied it. If you want to return to work after we are finished, you'll have to talk to Sam here. Do you have any more questions?
He replied, and I thought about why they chose this location of all places. It was basically in the middle of nowhere, and I had to wonder about that. This was in the beginning of November, and it was going to be snowing soon. Although I wasn't completely shocked. Companies all over the world would occupy facilities for a period of time to store materials, operate in, or even collaborate on business within this particular field when supply chain demand was low. Maybe there was something Sam couldn't tell us. It seemed to me that this company operated through more unconventional methods, but that was obviously between Sam and them, and whatever was going on seems to be federal-level shit. Well, what kind of supplies are you talking about? Is it something toxic? I asked. He just remained still, not moving a muscle, and replied,
That is classified information. You are not to share anything about our whereabouts to anyone, and if you do, it is punishable by law, as you will read in the non-disclosure agreement.
He said, smiling, and did not speak for a moment. Okay. How long will you be operating here? And are there any other duties included? I inquired. I wanted to ask so much more, but I knew when to stop prying and could use the extra cash. It's not like I could just outright ask them, "Why are you guys using a secluded warehouse for top-secret work?" without them getting to some level of annoyance with my questions. The other man piped up.
As long as it takes for us to finish. Your job will be no different from what you're already doing here. You're free to report any abnormalities you may find concerning at any time. We're just spending some time in that warehouse, and yeah, there may be extra tasks required depending on the situation. You do have military experience.
Calloway offered, with an attitude I didn't particularly like. What did he mean by that? They must have spoken with Sam about me and Ray. Ray never served, but was on the force for some time and was permitted to carry. I looked over at Sam briefly, and he just gave me a blank stare while scratching the back of his head. I gave it a once-over in my head, spending a passing moment to get my thoughts right and bury any red flags I may have noticed. This whole meeting happened so suddenly. I never got a call or email, and I didn't exactly get a whole lot of time to think about any of this. More money was always a plus, and I opted to play the grunt I was being paid for by saying, "Yes, sir," then signing the non-disclosure agreement. Ray followed our new orders as well. The next 2 weeks after this were fairly normal, minus the worker that walked out during a shift. I was checking Building C and made my way around the perimeter. This was a first for me, but one of the exit doors nearby flew open, with a worker in full gear frantically muttering something to himself.
It's too loud.
I watched as the man walked towards the parking lot while fumbling with his keys and lunchbox, then disappeared behind a corner. Just then, my radio crackled to life.
Patrol 1, this is management. We have a worker going home. No action needed. Out.
Stunned, I stood there for a moment thinking of what could have happened. So I recklessly advanced in his direction. Wait! I called out and began jogging his way and made it about 20 or so feet behind him. He did not slow down or stop for me. He continued walking quickly, turning another corner, and eventually was out of my sight. I don't normally act out of impulse, but the manner in which this man left his shift made me anxious. He looked terrified out of his mind. It was someone I was familiar with but never got his name. He's been here since I arrived, so he had to have been here for over a year. Still jogging, I saw that he was already approaching his vehicle and getting in, so I slowed down and eventually stopped. Phil was flagged and he got the gate opened for him. It looked like the guy was shouting at Phil in his car to hurry up. I was standing near the edge of where the parking lot meets the property, and Phil noticed me. I could see he looked at me frowning, shrugging his shoulders. When I asked one of the supervisors about this later, he marked something down in his work log and looked up at me.
I hate to say this. I think the guy's on drugs or something. Keep an eye on him, yeah? He wasn't threatening or anything, but still. Josh has been working here for 3 years and only had one incident with the machine, but it was pretty moderate. No one acts like that here. I'm gonna have a talk with him, that's for sure. I just let the guy go home to calm down for the rest of the day. I can't deal with any freakouts. We have a business to run.
He explained, and I agreed. I told him I would keep a close eye on him and got back to my duties. About another 2 weeks passed, and Ray told me something that had me more than a little worried. Ray and I have the opposite schedule, so when I'm about to clock in, he's about to clock out, and we pass by each other in the office.
D, you got a minute?
He asked while I was about to clock in. He had a troubled expression on his face. Yeah, everything all right? I asked, glancing over at the monitors. He also looked at the monitors, showing these people hauling in huge computers and, for some reason, large loudspeakers through the warehouse shutter door in Building B, and then looked back to me.
I don't know, dude. I was doing a sweep by Sam's office and overheard him on the phone with someone.
He put his hands up in a defensive gesture.
You know me. I don't screw around, and I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I just happened to be near his office with the janitor mopping when we both heard him yelling in there. He was fucking loud, dude. The door was shut, but it sounded like something bad was going on. I heard him shouting shit like, "How come I was never told about this? We already had a deal." And then we heard something break in there. We looked at each other and went our separate ways after that.
He finished by wiping some sweat from his forehead.
What the hell could all of that be about?
He asked quietly. I just shrugged, glancing at the monitor showing the new door with 2 guards armed to the teeth, and wondered, what could be going on in there that we don't know about? Looking back, I should have just found a new gig right then and there. That same worker was cleared again for going home early, and I would sometimes hear strange whirring noises when I would go by buildings A, B, and C. Not anything from the work here, but more like tinnitus. A worker on his break ended up giving me a pair of extra earplugs. They barely worked. I figured that it was some kind of machinery they had in there that caused the ringing, giving off some kind of emission frequency or something similar. I did see them haul in those huge machines and various computers throughout this process too. Maybe something with the speakers. This only piqued my curiosity even more. Just what the hell are they doing in there? Having a fucking concert? However, before I could even begin to think about bringing my concerns up to Sam, there was another duty added to my checklist right around then. One of the mill's supervisors called me when I was at home to inform me that there will be a construction crew digging below Building B, apparently to fix some issues with a piping system underneath the building that was causing some kind of leak. We were instructed to watch over that area as well once the leak was taken care of. Is it maybe have something to do with what's causing the buzzing in everyone's ears? I said and heard him chuckle over the phone. It was probably a stupid question, but I asked anyway.
I don't know. We had to shut down operations today and tomorrow, so you guys got a day off while they fumigate whatever this is and clear it. We haven't been going down there in years, so it doesn't really come as a surprise since they got an operation going on. Only natural to find some old pipes that may have burst. Maybe it was an accident. They better be more careful with whatever the hell they're doing, but if they clear it, I don't really see the problem. As long as no one gets killed, I guess.
He told me, chuckling again. I'm confused, I only said.
Yeah, you and me both, buddy. I'll talk to you later.
The first day I had to work with the extra duty included started off with me spilling coffee all over my work pants, causing me to almost be late for once. The construction crews were to be on site and would remain underneath the building for the next month or so. Sam seemed to be pretty upset about this, and it seemed to be confirmed when Ray spoke about the phone call he overheard. There was a huge hole they dug just to the east side of the building, and for up to 12 hours a day we would see the workers doing their thing. Throughout all of it, I couldn't really keep tabs on everything they were doing exactly. As time went on, we were given tasks like helping with maintenance or patrolling the outer edge of the property for a time, as if someone would be there. We were to report any suspicious persons and keep our pistols on us. Plus, that ringing would sometimes bother me, and I was starting to get really anxious ever since. If I was sitting by the cameras, I would catch myself fidgeting my leg up and down so fast it was like my nephew's video game controllers vibrating. I would have to grab my leg and force myself to calm down. Not only was I stressed about these new patrols, but it was something else. Like as if an uncontrollable urge to either bite my nails or scratch at an area would persist. After a week passed, we got another hire to come in and patrol with me and Ray on the night shifts only because we needed to do active rounds outside the entire perimeter now. He was a shorter, middle-aged guy, really quiet but did his job well, and his name was Geoff. I never got any other information about him. But this is around the time where things started to get, for lack of a better term, scary. It was mid-December, and the construction crews finally finished up their work. At around 1 in the morning, when Geoff and I were monitoring the camera feed, I was shaking my leg so fast it caused a slight tickling noise to occur as the wind outside howled. No snow was on the forecast, just a bitter chill in the air mixed with the darkness of night. Obviously, when the night shift rolls around, there's no workers present in the mill, and the 2 armed guards are stationed in front of the new door, decked out in urban BDUs and winter gear. It was here, when looking at the monitors displaying the feeds, that I spotted movement near one of the windows located on the 2nd level of Building B. It was through a feed that had to be panned over to get a better look. At first I could only recognize the outline of a shape, but it almost looked like a door opening. Clearly, someone wearing light-colored clothes appeared past the open door, crouching down. It was already pitch black outside, and the resolution from the camera wasn't all that great. But we could still see them with the dim light fixtures on the corners of the building. Zoom in, right there. I told Geoff, who was already on it, and zoomed in to where I pointed. It was a person, and I noticed they had something that looked like a phone in their hand. I had no knowledge of how to even get up there from inside. They must have found a ladder or emergency stairwell for roof access. Sure enough, I began to see the person crawling on a ledge and eventually made their way to their feet. I remembered them saying no one was supposed to leave, let alone be on roof access at a time like this. Was the person taking a smoke break? It was here when I noticed the person was wearing a lab coat. I sighed. Maybe they were a scientist, just up there having a smoke. Geoff looked up at me from the chair, and I kept looking at the feed. He wasn't pulling out any smokes. I felt a chill then and decided that something wasn't right. After I quickly searched through binders and folders that might contain the map of the interior, I found it and confirmed there was indeed a roof access staircase inside Building B. I looked up at the feet again, still baffled, noticing they began climbing onto the roof. Just then I remembered what that rude agent, Calloway, said to me.
You're free to report any abnormalities you may find concerning at any given time.
I grabbed my radio and changed the channel to their frequency. Hey, I think you've got a situation. Is there someone cleared to be on top of Building B? Over. I spoke into the radio, and I walked towards the window to look out at Building B. The radio crackled to life, and a commanding voice replied.
Negative. Our personnel will investigate. Out.
I looked back to Geoff and decided on going out there to see if I can assist in any way. They didn't tell me not to just now. I made my way to the door. Something's obviously wrong. Just monitor everything here, and if things go south, you know what to do. I said, and Geoff gave me a stern look. He nodded, and I got the door open. I jogged to Building B and didn't stop until I got to the entrance of the building. The armed guards had their rifles aimed up at the top of the building, and that's when I saw him. The person on the roof was holding up some kind of device.
It's too late! I already sent it to them! They're on their way!
The man shouted down at us and began laughing like he was on the verge of a mental breakdown. The armed guards had flashlight attachments and were keeping their aim on his torso. I was about 10 feet away from the commandos, and one of them noticed me.
Back to your building, now!
He shouted, and I jumped at the sudden, commanding voice. Just then, there was that ringing in my ears again. I was so confused and felt a ball form in my chest and stomach. Couldn't quite gauge what the hell was happening just then. That ringing persisted. It was tolerable, but sounded like there were speakers all around me, blasting this dog whistle kind of noise. I shook my head and got back to my senses, and the ringing was to a minimum now. The man on the roof looked to be a scientist or a researcher that must have been helping out with whatever they're doing here. I couldn't see his body entirely, but now, the man was holding his ears with the device still in his hand.
You made this mess!
The man kept shouting this over and over until I heard the gunshot. Another operative must have gotten up there. My heart sank when the spray of crimson misted in the air as the hole burst through the man's forehead. His arms went to his sides, and he slumped forward, falling over the ledge down the 2 stories into a crumpled heap on the ground in front of the soldiers. The device the man was holding lay broken in pieces on the concrete next to the blood that began pooling around his body. My eyes went wide with fear.
Hostile neutralized. Cleanup unit. Come to the entrance.
One of the men reported it on their radio. I should have left. I should have said to hell with the money and gone home. But now, I was right in the stink of this crap. I just witnessed not only something that wasn't meant for civilians to see, but a murder. Alarm bells began going off despite the ringing that still persisted. Before I knew it, the soldier closest to me aimed his rifle at me and paced forward. Whoa! What the hell? I was blinded by the flashlight and raised my hands up. Stay where you are, he shouted, and I kept my hands up with the gun dangling from my finger. Easy, I'm not a threat. I tried pleading with this guy and did my best to keep my gaze fixed on the gas mask the operative was wearing. It was here when a constant flood of thoughts invaded my mind. Who was that scientist talking about? Who is on their way? Could the armed men hear the ringing too? Was their gear suppressing them from hearing it? Was I being exposed to radiation? Are these guys even military? Drop your weapon slowly, he barked, and I cautiously put my pistol on the cold pavement. If I was going to survive, I had to play along with their demands. I was rushed back to the guards building and was told to stay put until they finished handling the situation. A soldier remained inside there with us until our shift ended. However, we did not get to go home, and nobody else came in to work that day. I should have known better than to sit back and allow this to happen. But it was already too late. My gun was left outside and undoubtedly taken by them. The jig was up, and Geoff and I were suddenly taken hostage inside the guard's office. It was at this point where the entire facility had been taken over by this group. They had helicopters buzzing in to deploy more of these commandos under their order within 20 minutes. I know the sounds of a deployment pretty well. They had to have had commandos stationed all over the building by now, inside and out. I ventured that even snipers and men with RPGs being positioned in elevated places. They were preparing for a battle. This is what happened. 3 days passed after the man on the roof was killed, and it was Christmas Eve when the entire facility was taken over. We were in zip ties and placed in the locker room. Commandos would periodically watch over us. We were kept hydrated and fed sometimes, and Geoff was actually quiet throughout this whole process. I did my best to tell him that help would be here soon, and to try and relax, although it didn't really seem to faze him. I was probably a little more frightened than he was. We were basically POWs. One guy was really rude to us for no good reason, telling us that we were going to die here and trying to frighten us. We were already confused and helpless. They weren't going to just announce it, but there was no doubt we were fooled by some militia or terrorist group. However, I noticed a quick lack of morale with a couple of the soldiers. They knew they were in for it, and the actual military would probably be here any minute.
If it wasn't for that guy
One of them stopped himself and cleared his throat while the other commando remained quiet. Christmas rolled around. There was heavy snowfall, and their command stated that a winter storm was approaching. This gave them the thought that any attack by armed forces would be put off for the time being. But they were wrong. That same soldier who would give us shit remained inside the office with another operative for a period of time until they were ordered to report back immediately.
This is Theta Command. All units report to your designated battle zones. Weapons free.
Fuck.
I heard the one guy shout and looked over to us.
If you know what's good for you, I'd hide somewhere.
The other guy scrambled out without a word.
Man, screw you guys. I should just kill you both right now.
But he didn't. He stood there and stared at us with his hands trembling. He screamed out and took off to fulfill his orders. Geoff and I were petrified in stone. They only used zip ties, so once he left, we easily escaped. I remembered thinking about just running, but I valued my life and decided on staying inside the building. We got ourselves free and stood for a moment.
I don't know what the hell's going on. Let's barricade ourselves in. We don't stand a chance out there. What if something happens and we have to call for help?
Geoff, for once, said to me in a surprisingly low tone, and we both frantically began bombarding the door using the metal desk, the fridge, and filing cabinets. The two of us were strong enough to get a good blockade up. There was no time to even think. We kept finding more items to put against the door until we definitely had enough weight to hold. At least for a while. After we were satisfied, we just both looked at each other panting. And then over to the monitors. What the hell, right? I remember saying, and we then scrambled over to watch the feed. What unfolded will forever be something that replays inside my head worse than any kind of flashback from my time serving. It was an absolute massacre. First, from inside the building and to the right of us, we heard the sounds of armed forces approaching. A loud wham then boomed from within the facility, and we saw the damage on the monitor. It was definitely an airstrike on Building B. A cacophony of gunfire then erupted all around us, and we saw on the feed as the battle ensued. I could see men falling to their deaths, small explosions, scientists scrambling out of the facility and getting gunned down. Helicopter turret guns ripped a handful of the operatives in half. Instead of hearing that ringing, or even jingle bells, Christmas carols on this holiday season, it was replaced with the sounds of total chaos and bloodshed. Holy shit, I said, crouching down by one of the monitors, telling Geoff we need to either get down or get in a locker. One of the handbooks stated that in case of an emergency or terrorist attack, an option would be to lock the door and call for help, then find a locker. The lockers were bulletproof and big enough for someone to hide inside of it until help arrived. Bullets were already ricocheting off the building. We had to find some cover immediately. The help was already here, and the locker room was a small enough space in the building. I yelled for Geoff to get inside one of the lockers.
If we stay put, we'll get shot through a window.
A louder explosion occurred, shaking the entire building, and we stopped to look out of the window it came from. We were stunned to see that they managed to successfully target an oncoming military chopper and take it down. It spun out of control and landed in the parking lot. The flames destroyed my vehicle. A single window shattered then. We got moving, ducking and holding our heads. Having no other choice, we opened the lockers closest to us and squeezed in. I got down as low as possible. The suffocating dread was persistently clocking down more minutes of my life, no doubt. The gunfire and explosions outside were enough to drive anyone mad. But being trapped in a metal coffin on top of it was not on my bucket list. Needless to say, we were trapped regardless and just needed to wait this out. After some time, the gunfire died down and we would only occasionally hear a pop ring out every so often, and some shouting. The feed was still playing, and I had a thought. There's a record option, and I decided to get out of the locker and press the switch for it. I took a deep, long, and exaggerated breath, then slowly got out of the locker. Geoff soon followed. Let's check the camera feed. I want to record this, I told him, and he nodded. Looking around, there didn't seem to be any damage, but there was a window shattered, and we found a couple of stun batons to clutch onto in an attempt to feel like we could defend ourselves against any of the operatives trying to get in and kill us. We then walked over to the monitors and found the chairs to sit down. I clicked the record option on. I'd say about 10 minutes passed. I don't know how long the fighting went on for. I hadn't even thought to check the time. The odds, for whatever reason, seemed to be evenly matched. This was a brutal battle. Getting a closer look at things as the feed was recording, we noticed just how many commandos they really had. How the hell they managed to station hundreds of armed men in that facility, I have no true knowledge of. I don't even know what to say, I remember saying out loud instead of just thinking it. A short moment passed, and as if on cue, something else was happening in one of the camera feeds that displayed an area behind building B and A. It was at this moment that a raw and all-encompassing new fear now took hold. There is really no other explanation for what I am about to tell you. They obviously should have sent a larger strike team here to fight, because on one of the camera feeds displayed a person clutching a soldier by the throat. The one arm clutching the soldier's throat was raised high. With the other, he was doing something to the soldier's abdomen, but we really couldn't see. The man was at least 7 or 8 feet tall, maybe more, and was lifting the soldier up with little effort while completely fucking bare from the waist up. He looked to be wearing some kind of hospital garb, only covered in blood and grime. With ease, this beast of a man tossed the soldier aside like he was an empty bottle. We could clearly see the muscle definition ripple and turn red, despite the quality of the feed. He just stood there breathing into the air like a mad dog, head violently twitching. This guy was an animal. It was 17 degrees Fahrenheit out there. This was unnatural. How in the fuck is that possible? Just then, the brute snapped his head to the left, as if in response to me speaking. I almost let myself go right there, looking over at Geoff briefly as he looked back with shocked expressions on our faces. When we looked back to the feed and before we even knew it, the man was no longer there.
God, please help us,
Geoff whispered, and I noticed him clearly shivering. I felt a horrible chill too, and thought about getting in the locker again. I raised my arm and pointed to them, and he nodded to me. We quickly got inside the lockers again, and I kept the stun baton in my grasp. Seconds passed. More time passed. Suddenly there was a burst of loud banging on the door. And I mean loud. More glass broke, and I closed my eyes and felt the ground shake. There was this horrible squelching noise, as if something long and wet were writhing and reaching for something inside the office. It was making contact with things inside there. I was keeping my eyes tightly shut, and after a few seconds, I was brave enough to try and get a peek out of the vent. There were these red shapes appearing outside the small cracks. I couldn't quite see it all, but the lights went out, most likely from that thing breaking all of the bulbs and probably the monitors. From out there, I began to hear this raspy breathing through the wreckage, as if coming from a ravenous maw. This was it. I was going to die here. But in an instant, everything just stopped. I tried my best to cover my mouth and breathe through the little air pockets in my gloves, because I was basically hyperventilating. I'm honestly surprised my heart hadn't burst then. I almost wished it had, looking back. A short moment passed, and we remained still inside the lockers. My breathing calmed, and I was able to quietly catch my breath. Thank God for the sounds of the storm out there muffling my quiet breaths. Geoff must have been doing something similar. As the seconds rolled on, I listened closely for any sounds, but only the storm persisted. Once I had the thought to close my eyes again and take another quiet breath. I heard the most terrifying noise come from out there, like several nails on a chalkboard, only it was the yell of a man crying, perversely mixed with a dying animal screeching in pain. Something like that ringing came back, and I lost consciousness from fright. I don't know how much time passed, but I woke to the sound of Geoff opening his locker. Opening my eyes, he appeared before me and helped me out of the locker.
You okay?
He offered. I said yes, and he spoke again.
I think whatever that thing is, it's gone.
I looked around. The entire office was trashed. Monitors were broken, and there were these darkened marks all across the ceiling and walls. Noticing the broken window, I saw the blood trail on the snow that led to the forest from the facility out there. That freak of nature showed no signs of being harmed by the weather and escaped this place. That thought alone terrifies me. I looked back to the monitors and noticed two of them still weakly displaying the feed. Both the bodies of the soldiers and commandos lay fallen, and I could see some of their weapons still intact. Geoff, I know this sounds crazy, but I have to get in that building and find out what's going on, I said to him.
I understand, I think.
He replied and put his head down. As a former infantryman stationed in Iraq, I feel like it's my duty to go out there and figure something out. Anything. I stared at him, feeling that old sense of duty return to me, and he raised his baton.
Do you need backup?
He asked, smiling weakly. I smiled back, but I honestly did not want this young man to risk his life, in case there was something else out there. Then again, someone to watch my six wouldn't hurt at all. I appreciate you. Let's go, just be careful. When we get out there, snag one of their guns and let's try and look for a radio one of their soldiers had. We might have a chance of calling out for their backup squad, I told him. We devised a quick plan to get inside Building B and see if there was a communication center like their headquarters still intact. You ready? He took a huge breath and nodded. All right, let's get out through that window. I'll go first. I said, and we went ahead with our plan to brave the storm and head for Building B. There may be other survivors in there who could still be armed and willing to kill us, I told this to Geoff, and he said he was ready for anything after what we went through. I had the feeling we both knew this was a risky idea, but we were now in this together no matter what else could be in store for us. If no one else was coming, we had to do something, and we had to do it now. There was a window big enough for the both of us that we could easily fit through. The jump wouldn't be but 10 feet, so we made it out to the cold. It was still dark, but the sun was about to rise, so we had a dim orange glow faintly aiding our sight. We both found rifles and searched for rounds and magazines. Everything was quiet now, save for the howling wind that attacked our senses, and we made our way to the entrance of Building B. The snow was pelting us in the face, and we were covered in it by the time we got inside. The opening on the large metal door had caved in from an explosion, and we slipped inside, avoiding the small fires that blazed menacingly in the wind. Once inside, we found out quickly just how awful this atrocity was. Not only were people shot and left for dead, but there were also bodies torn to shreds and discarded. That thing must have had its way with them, because blood caked the walls and bodies lay in a gory mess. Bullet holes and charred marks from more explosions littered the walls and any surface. We both just looked at each other in shock. "Let's go," I said quietly. We proceeded forward, because I noticed an opening with some lights that flickered around a corner. We cautiously made our way there, and got to a point where it looked like we finally hit an area with the new construction. The addition was dug out deep below and made into this makeshift science lab. Wires and bulbs that were connected hung up haphazardly to keep the light illuminating the entire area. I could see those large speakers embedded into the rocky walls. Sparks flew from multiple instruments and machines that buzzed or malfunctioned, but were neatly stacked in certain areas. There was a large operating table with bolted-down reinforced shackles that lay broken to the side of it. More blood and glass were littered around this area. I even picked up a few documents on the ground, but most were stepped on or covered in filth and blood to even be legible. Scientists and soldiers, both our military and their commandos, were all dead. I was speechless. There were no words to even be said at all. We just walked into something straight out of a horror film. Going to have a look around those desks. You check that upper level over there and see if you can find a soldier with a radio. I told Geoff and he agreed, aiming the rifle around and walking away. I made my way towards the set of desks that had computers still booted up. Some were destroyed, and I tried messing around with one of them and opening anything that could tell me what they were doing here. I couldn't find anything discernible. Pushing that aside, I moved towards another desk and had a look around. More bodies lay dead on the floor, and I decided to look for that radio. I bent down to one of them and moved his body to look up at me. The soldier suffered multiple gunshot wounds to the chest and face. Just then, I heard a cough and aimed my weapon at the source of the sudden noise. It was one of their commandos that was still alive. I had the thought of just opening fire, but I wanted to try and get some answers. His head was slumped forward, leaning against a crate, and I could see his rib cage was poking out through the torn body armor. He must have been in a great deal of pain. I used this to my advantage and approached him. There wasn't a helmet on him, but the hairline was oddly familiar. Right as he looked up at me, I knew it was Calloway, one of the guys that had me sign the NDA. He sputtered and blood flew from his mouth, trying to say something to me, and I remained motionless, transfixed on this horrifying situation. His right arm was twitching, and he attempted to reach for what I assumed was his wound. His arm began moving faster, and just as I realized he was reaching for something else, I snapped back and a muffled pop to my right rang out. Calloway's head caved in. The pistol he went for dropped from his grip and landed to the side. I shouted out and got down on my knee, almost falling on my ass, aiming the rifle around, and found out there was another survivor. One of our guys had a silenced pistol aimed at Calloway and saved my life. He must have noticed my security guard patch on my winter coat and made the judgment call that I wasn't a threat. I quickly registered the situation and called out to Geoff, rushing over to the soldier while aiming around to see if anyone else noticed, almost in tears at this point. I finally got to him and studied the man in my arms, noticing his rank. He was the captain for this platoon. Geoff quickly made it over to the soldier, and the soldier was reaching for his face mask. Geoff then took off the soldier's helmet and face mask for him with ease. There was blood pooling out of his mouth, and he also had severe wounds to the abdomen. Some of the blood got onto my coat and hands, but I didn't care. I needed to hear this man's last words now, or it would be too late. He put his life on the line for this. "Can you speak?" I asked, and he was still coughing up blood quietly. He did not speak or move at first. He just looked at me with an expression one would only have on the verge of death. And then with a slow and deliberate motion, he opened his front pouch and felt around for something. I saw his eyes close, and he smiled through the pain. He then frowned and pulled out a small USB port and offered it to me, still coughing. When he did this, my insides flipped, and I instantly asked, "What is this?" then took it from his hand. The captain looked up at the ceiling while choking on blood, and only said, "Everything." As his eyes rolled, his body went still, and he took his last breath right there in my arms. There was nothing else to do but gently lay him back to the ground and let the fallen captain rest in peace now. After a passing moment of silence, taking another look at the bodies around me, I took a look at the USB port in my hand. "Geoff, cover me, okay? I know this is reckless, but I need to know what this contains now. I don't think I can wait," I told him. And Geoff, as usual, kept quiet and nodded, giving me his stern look again. I made it to a computer and popped it in with Geoff following. He raised the weapon to study the area periodically, but we couldn't keep our eyes away from the screen. There was a report with some attached files. Once the file transfer was complete, I read it all in one go, as quickly as I possibly could. To sum it up, this attack and gathering of information on a certain terrorist organization was called Operation Winter Eyes, and anyone available on call was sent to wipe out the force from a group called TNDA that was found on U.S. soil, otherwise known as the New Dawn Administration. All of what I am about to share is obviously not meant for civilians to hear about, but all things considered, I don't really give a fuck right now. Throughout reading this, I found out that not only are secrets and advanced technology being kept from the public, but ranks within NASA had been infiltrated by one of these members and gain information about a planet's moon that's never been documented before, according to the report. Which planet was crossed out? That doesn't surprise me. Apparently, this moon had proof of living organisms residing there. Thermal readings and multiple satellite videos displayed these life forms fully functioning, and people were beyond ecstatic. A team was, of course, sent out into the outer edge of the planet's rim. The ship sent a team of 14 people, and they came back, but something terrible happened to some of those astronauts, and it was seemingly because of this TNDA group. Records indicate that someone from inside the spacecraft fired off some kind of relay signal and disrupted the life forms from moving and quite possibly sustaining their habitat. These creatures were able to somehow collectively reach the NASA spacecraft from the moon and cause damage to the hull. Records indicate the impact on the damage report showed no signs of any cause for losing control out there in space. However, the report stated that several of these life forms housed themselves inside the bodies of some of the astronauts sent out there, and throughout this were able to pilot their way back to Earth and landed somewhere in the North Atlantic. The report indicated that these parasitic anomalies were only capable of feeding, reproducing, and if housed inside another biological life form for a long enough period of time, can essentially rewire the human genome down to the very last cell within the unfortunate victim's body. They classified the size of the things to be about 6 to 7 feet long, and were considered as being somewhat similar to Taenia or pork tapeworm. Scientists, at the time of containing the initial outbreak, were able to use cutting-edge technology to halt the organisms from causing any more harm, and only when the military came back with the NASA spacecraft did researchers find out that this parasite was able to perfectly take over and even mimic the host it is able to feed on or infect with its offspring, which are microscopic, larva-like organisms that infect your organs from the inside, and eventually taking over by reaching the brain. The organs and limbs are digested and somehow reanimated. Using this substance, the larvae collectively secrete that is similar to mucus, and the main parasite body can trigger commands from within, using its own cellular network like a hive mind. It can then even intake oxygen like any other human being after a full assimilation, steadily growing larger and larger from within as the feeding continues. It's said that mutations occur after that point. How large they can grow isn't documented, but there was a patient 0 that was supposed to help them determine that in humans. The scientists were, at one point, able to test these things on animals like dogs, monkeys, and even large reptiles with results that would make your stomach churn. What was supposed to be a simple gather and collect data mission in space turned out to be something unimaginable. And the big guy we just saw toss a soldier like it was yesterday's trash? Patient 0. Patient 0 had no record of any identity, at least not on this report. Just that he was an astronaut sent to that planet, and the name was blocked out. He was actually being hauled to a top-secret government prison when TNDA intercepted the smaller military convoy and successfully took the shackled brute to the steel mill, tricking Sam into thinking this was official business somehow. The military tried to track down the group but were unsuccessful. TNDA decided that this was a golden opportunity and began experiments on the subject immediately here, acquiring all the necessary fake documents to make everything seem legitimate. There was a side note typed out in this section that read, "Possible aid from double agent, identity unknown." The file also indicated that any other abilities of this organism, while inside a biological life form, were yet to be determined, but thoroughly studied. After more research, they concluded that certain vibrations, frequencies, and sound waves were able to control the organism from within its host, putting it in some sort of stasis. They collected that data from the audio logs of the mission, determining the sound waves on that planet caused them to, in unison, vibrate on the planet's surface and are contained within the atmosphere that way. But the relay signal caused that piercing frequency to occur as they approached the unknown planet before the attack. Whoever figured that out had to be a damn genius. That would explain the loudspeakers here, and it was recorded that the designated frequency would cause an amount of discomfort in human beings, yet the sound is somehow barely audible. It must have been amplified underground. When introduced to water or certain temperatures, this thing adapts to the environment without fail, as the cellular structure of these parasitic entities are not fully known to planet Earth. If housed and fed inside the invaded biological organism long enough, the human who fell victim to the parasite would appear the same as the person they were before. But only now all human emotion and empathy have been devoured. You would see a shell of the former person they once were. The report also claims that the limbs are detached or removed, the cellular function within the reanimated body would cause a mutation to occur. That was the only information I could gather from this report on Patient Zero and these things they found. Anything else is either yet to be documented or the government and TNDA know more. However now, since some assholes in a fucked the fuck up doomsday cult disturbed the natural order in the solar system, we now know that these things made contact with humans and can remain housed comfortably inside a life form, and like a twisted puppeteer sent from outer space. TNDA had also done their own studies, but I couldn't find any more information. How to exterminate these things has yet to be documented. With all of this in mind, there was another attached file that explained how one of the underground hives and facilities under direct command of the United States government had, in fact, been compromised at one point as well, thus turning over a plethora of information, as well as access to a certain satellite unit's mainframe. The sole perpetrator had posed as a researcher and escaped with all of this classified intel. They made the connection that, since that top member gained access to certain satellites, they assumed he or she used some kind of jammer to block them from tracking their location after the capture of Patient Zero and fooling the military. The man or woman in question is known to be a figurehead in this terrorist group, and their identity has yet to be verified. The only alias they've uncovered is a single name of Goldstein, and from what the military gathers, plans on using diseases and even create bioweapons to infiltrate certain military compounds and trigger an apocalyptic event to capitalize on. Surprisingly, over the years this group gained quite the following in the underground world of this country. Ex-Secret Service agents and even grunts for the Marines were blacklisted, and it stated that cults were being formed with agents spreading the influence all over the planet. All targets and enemies of the state. The report had also mentioned a steel mill owner getting killed after speaking to a scientist over a radio transmission, informing the scientists of roof access. Sam is now dead because he tried to tell someone about TNDA. Ray really had overheard one of those assholes telling Sam about the dig, and probably more we didn't know about. Ray. That lucky bastard. Wait until he gets a load of this, I thought to myself. Well, What a merry fucking Christmas this turned out to be. After reading through all of this, Geoff and I stood for a long moment, staring at the computer screen, displaying images of people that had no idea they were being photographed. Men in suits getting into luxurious vehicles with a security detail, what looked to be a team of researchers, and these monstrous experiments the military conducted on animals, and I could clearly see what they did to Patient Zero. They sliced him apart and reattached him time and time again to get their data. Geoff and I decided to just get the hell out of Dodge, and we found Sam's old company truck nearby with the keys still in his office. Thank God there was still enough gas in there to just get us onto the main road and out of there. We got in with me driving and took off down the road and past the burning helicopter. Once we made it onto the main road, there was a military Humvee on fire near a trail that snakes off by the main road as well. It was undoubtedly one of their checkpoints that got overrun in case the battle was in their favor and civilians came around. Knowing that this place was housed in the middle of nowhere and people were rarely seen around here, I had to wonder if people could even hear the explosions and gunfire, or even if the world was listening at all. Probably distracted by their phones and devices. If they had thermals watching us from above, they let us escape. Because I never got stopped, nor did I stop driving until we were far away from that nightmare. This made me wonder even more. Another thing that stuck out is when I took a glance in the rearview mirror. I almost stopped the vehicle. But before I even had the thought to even slow down, Geoff said something that snapped me back to staying alive.
Keep driving.
After he said this, I only nodded and sped up. Because one of our soldiers was standing on the road watching us drive away from the steel mill, with his stomach entirely emptied. This was over a month ago. I haven't even watched the news or gone online and just assumed the attack was completely covered up as an accident or something. This is the first time since the ordeal that I've been online, and I haven't heard anything from Geoff or Ray. Geoff asked me to drop him off somewhere near his house after that, and I decided on moving from place to place. I doubted they would just leave me alone, so I decided on running and keeping that USB port from the soldier with me, for the time being at least. I'm being followed now. I know it. It was only a matter of time before I either slipped up or they were just able to find me. Unfortunately, like a paranoid moron, I slipped up by using that USB port and my laptop I quickly grabbed from home, along with a few important items. I just wanted to confirm again that what I was seeing wasn't some hallucination. However, it triggered something. A failsafe or whatever. In bold letters, a message popped up. This device has been compromised. I just panicked, smashing the thing in my laptop to pieces right there in the hotel room, and quickly darted out of there. I already paid for 2 nights, but it was time to move. I don't know who to trust. Maybe I should just let the military capture me. But I just panicked and destroyed the USB. Even if the military is trying to get to me, I don't know if I want that kind of involvement right now. They have already displayed the carnage and lengths they would go to seemingly cover this up. Imagine what they might do to me. I'm not only paranoid, but terrified beyond words. and have considered just taking my own life after I post this story. Maybe the military will help. After all, I don't really know if I want to take any chances. Normally I wouldn't take such drastic measures, but I'm just a nobody anyway. And whatever they have in store for me just might be worse. Before I sign off, I said that I was being followed, sure. But the TNDA or the military isn't the only force I am worried about. That thing escaped from the steel mill. And there was another topic that went over my head throughout everything I had taken in. These things are capable of infecting a host, and the soldier that was being gripped by Patient Zero had to have been completely taken over by now. I keep seeing these people randomly appear before me throughout my time of running. They would be standing somewhere, eerily watching me from a distance. It would be a different person every time. I would notice them, and they wouldn't move a muscle. They would just remain still with their eyes fixed on me no matter where I would go. I would walk through a crowd of people, drive somewhere, take a risk and grab a bite or a drink somewhere, and boom, they would be there. Faces fixed in a blank expression, focused on me, and only me. Somewhere, either outside a window or even close by, being mere feet away. If these things somehow perfectly blend in with society, then we need to know. I can't imagine you would want to be kept in the dark about something like this. And if TNDA somehow captures this monstrosity again, then who knows what might happen. It's late in the morning, and I am currently held up in some shitty hotel room yet again, paying cash and not using my card or real name for anyone to track. I've taken to drinking again and eat sleeping pills like candy every night to attempt at blocking out my night terrors. Wow, I didn't even realize how long this had gotten. Even so, when you go through something traumatic, reliving the experience can become easy. I honestly don't know where else to go. And whoever actually takes the time and hears this, thank you. And know this. Something beyond our wildest imaginations exists out there, and there's nothing we can do about it. Let this be a warning to those who wonder about the secrets of the world. Lock your doors. Give your loved ones a hug and a kiss. And remember that danger could be closer to home than we may think. Hopefully someone who can actually help does something. The world may very well depend on it.
Sally Mae had married Luther Webster 28 years ago, and now she was washing his best clothes for his funeral.
He should not to have done it.
Sally Mae Webster told me as she fished Luther Webster's tired blue denim shirt out of the galvanized soaking tub. She rinsed, stirred, and boiled Luther's clothes in the tub over the fire. She She laid the clothes over a wooden bench and beat on them with the flat of her battling stick, pounding the dirt and soap out of the clothes. Washing by hand was that kind of work, tedious, slow, and hard, but not everyone in the world could afford their own washing machine. The whole time Sally Mae told me how her husband and my best friend, Luther Webster, had stood up against the Bates brothers.
Them Bates boys stole our horse,
She said.
They burned down the stall.
Are you sure it was them? I asked.
We know they did it.
She answered.
They were stupid enough to leave a red hunting cap with the name Junior Bates scrawled on the lining in black indelible ink.
That sounds like proof to me, I said. Did you call the sheriff?
The sheriff's last name is Bates,
Sally Mae pointed out.
When Luther went and told Sheriff Bates that his best beloved nephew stole our horse and burned our barn, he didn't say or do a goddamn thing.
I guess that Sheriff Bates must have had himself a death day, I said. First chance I get, I'll go and talk to him, see if I can't blow his ears clean out.
Wouldn't do any good now, would it?
Sally Mae said. Wouldn't hurt any, I pointed out. At least it wouldn't hurt me one little ding-dong bit. Sally Mae just grunted at that, turned back to her laundry.
Luther walked up to their cabin.
She went on.
He said he'd talk some sense into them. I said that I ought to go with him, but he went alone.
I kept listening.
One thing lead to another. Next thing I know, Luther was lying dead in the dirt, shot in the back.
She said.
I told him that he ought not go up against those Bates boys, but he did it just the same. And now he's lying out there in the hills. I can't even bring him home to bury him. They've got somebody watch that body night and day. They say they'll shoot anyone who dares to move it.
What sense does that make, I asked? Guarding a dead body like that?
Who said sense had anything to do with it?
She said, giving the tub another stir.
It's Bates sense. Nothing more than spite and meanfulness and pure boiled hatred.
Well, where are Luther's friends? I asked Sally. Why aren't they coming to see to his burial?
His friends? Right now, you're it.
Nobody else?
Luther never really put up with other people since coming back from Korea,
Sally said.
He kept to himself mostly. He wasn't a lonely man so much as he was just awfully used to being alone. He would talk to me, and he would talk to the cat, and he would even talk to the dog on a good day. But that was just about as social as life got for my man Luther. He was good to me, though, and after a while his solitary ways kind of rubbed off on me as well.
But I understood what she was telling me. There had been no crowd around me since the war. I hadn't even talked to Luther since coming home. It wasn't like I didn't think of them. I just didn't think of actually calling them. Then, 2 nights ago, Sally woke me up from a sound sleep with a 2 a.m. phone call for help. She'd walked the 2 miles into town and fed a lonely silver dime into the coin slot.
Luther has been shot to death,
She told me over the phone. I'll be there directly, I told her, just as soon as I can get. It took me 2 whole days, but I got there.
The truth is everyone in town's afraid of the Bates boys.
She went on, still working that wash tub.
They already put the word out that anyone foolish enough to try and see that Luther got a proper burial had better dig a grave for their own first. I'm about giving up on the idea of burying him,
she admitted.
I figured that either some bear would drag him off, or else the Bates boys would get tired of the smell of dead meat and finish off what was left of him with a tin of kerosene and a match.
She shook the clothes out and wrung them by hand, and then she hung them over the willow-withy fence to dry.
I tried to do it myself,
she said.
I walked up there and I tried to drag him home, but they wouldn't give me a chance. They pushed me down and they tore my blouse. They would have done worse if I hadn't had a butcher knife tucked in my belt where I could grab it.
I could see her biting the inside of her cheek hollow while she said that last bit. It was easier to ache than to grieve. She wasn't going to let a tear fall if she could help it, but it hurt just the same to watch her chew.
Until you drove up, I was thinking of maybe burying his best set of clothes and putting up a wooden cross over them.
She confessed.
It wouldn't have been much, but at least it would have been something.
I had first met Luther Webster in the summer of 1950 in the Korean jungle just outside of a little town that sounded as if someone's mouth was full of bottle glass when they had named it. It was raining that day. A hard, slow drizzle that left you soaked to the bone all day long. Well, we were cold and wet and absolutely miserable. I was sitting in my foxhole carrying an M1 Garand rifle. The Garand was a useful tool. It had enough stopping power to put down a grown man with one shot if you put that shot in the right place. Its 8-cartridge loading clip allowed you to keep up a fairly stiff rate of fire, so long as you weren't inclined to the occasional bout of thumb-fingered cack-handedness. With a bayonet, you could gullet anyone foolish enough to come at you head-on, and the rifle had enough heft in the butt end to bang in somebody's skull quite nicely if it come down to that. It did a proper killing job, which is what we Americans had really come to Korea for. Whether it was right or wrong, we were here to kill North Koreans until they finally saw south. So we lay there in the dark and waited, and those north-minded Koreans came at us sometime after midnight. Have you ever heard of a human wave? Well, that first night, the North Koreans hit us with an entire human tsunami as platoon after platoon poured out of the jungle and washed over our foxholes. I fought back just as hard as I could, firing shot after shot until I ran out of ammo. That's when the first bullet caught me in the shoulder and I dropped down. The rain pulled up at the bottom of my foxhole until I found myself squatting in a foot of water, unsure of whether or not I was going to bleed to death from the bullet hole or just accidentally drown myself under a sump of watered-down blood. I slid my bayonet out of its sheath and I fixed it into place on the end of my Garand and sat there waiting to die. Wounded or not, I was determined to give those boys a fight before they took me under. And that was where I first met Luther. He jumped into the foxhole and he slapped the field dressing over my wound like a one-man MASH team. Then he stood up with his Browning automatic rifle in hand, and he fought back for an entire hour, standing over my foxhole and firing 30 caliber size holes into the belly of that human tsunami that kept coming at us until finally our long prayed for reinforcements finally showed up and drove the North Koreans back into the woods. That was the first day I met Luther. He saved my life, and I knew it, then and now. The way that I see it, a man like Luther Webster is an honest-to-God American hero. He deserved more than a lonely country graveyard. He deserved an orchestra, and a bugler, and a squadron of Marines in full-dress regalia, and a 21-gun salute. I was here to see that done. And those clothes will be dry in an hour or two, the way the sun is heating up, I said to Sally. I'll just go on up over the hill to the Bates farm and bring Luther back.
You're sure you want to do this?
Sally asked. Sure doesn't have a thing to do with it, I told her. I have to do it is more like what it really is. I opened the trunk of my car and I changed into my uniform. I made sure my boots were tied and I cinched my ammo belt snug. I lifted my Garand rifle from out of the gray blankets I had wrapped it in. I checked it carefully and loaded the first clip of 8 cartridges. Lastly, I hooked my 1 grenade onto my belt. I had a .45 automatic pistol holstered at my belt. The pistol wasn't much for distance, but it would be useful if all else failed. I walked up the hills, trying to remember the words to High Noon's "Do not forsake me, oh my darling." A cricket sang to me as I walked. Stupid, stupid, stupid. But I couldn't tell you the name of the song it was singing. The sun sliced through the treetops and painted the dirt with Venetian slats of light and shadow. The wood frogs creaked and the horseflies and mosquitoes were hungry as always. The devil's paintbrush lit the dark forest floor like a legion of brightly burning candles. It took nearly a half an hour to reach the Bates farm. Luther's body was lying in the dirt where they had left him. Oh, man. The maggots moistly crawled across what was left of him, flexing and coaxing their foul bodies like tiny dead fingers. There were so many maggots that I could hear them moving, making their own kind of music. It looked like maybe a coyote had been chewing on some of his stomach. Fat, nasty green bottle flies buzzed noisily about the wet knots tangled in the fatty folds of his viscera. I had seen worse in the war, but it's never easy looking at a friend that way. I took my pack off and laid it down beside Luther's body. Then I looked down at the cabin. It was a solid-looking structure that looked about 100 years old, built upon a foundation of carefully stacked ground rock, with a locust seal and walls of mountain pine that looked as if they might stand for another 100 years. I put 3 tall, fat poplar trunks between myself and the house before I called out. "I've come for Luther," I called out to the cabin. "He needs to be buried."
"Leave him right where we flung him,"
a voice graveled out from the shadows of the front porch.
"We like him fine right where he is."
I eyeballed the situation. I could see a shadow casting out from behind the gray willow rocking chair. Somebody was kneeling there and watching me. It might be they had been sitting there the whole time and I hadn't noticed. Damn it, I was getting careless in my old age. I put the gear into my shoulder, took aim and fired 2 shots into the back of the rocker. The dry wood shattered and the man that had been hiding behind the rocker fell down upon the porch. Things happened fast after that. What sounded like a shotgun blasted out the glass in the front window. A shower of buckshot rattled through the poplar leaves. At least 2 balls of shot smacked into the trunk of the 3rd tree that I was standing behind. I fired 3 more times, once at the window hole and twice into the wall below the window. 2 men came running out from behind the house, angling sideways toward the hillside in a determined attempt to outflank me. One of them was carrying an axe, the other a clubbish chunk of firewood. They were easy killing as I put a bullet into each of their midsections. Then I snapped off a shot at the front door to keep them guessing as I fished out another 8-shell clip and slammed it home. "How many graves do I need to dig today?" I called out. "You tell me how high I need to learn to count to."
"Just yourn,"
somebody called right back.
"1 is all you'll ever need."
My math lesson was followed by a ragged rattle of gunfire. The Bates boys sounded upset and a little nervous, which was good for me. It's important to keep calm and cool in a firefight. There is nothing like badly timed panic and anger for messing with your aim. And right now, I aim to exterminate the Bates clan. They had killed my friend, and they had threatened to kill others. They had torn Sally Mae's blouse, Lord knows what else they would do if left unhindered, so I intended to root them out like a bad patch of weeds. I emptied another clip, working my shots down the length of the house, and the return fire slacked off some. Somebody popped up at the window, pointed what looked to be a .38 pistol, and plunked themselves empty in my direction. This far out was a fool's distance for pistol fire, but I wasn't about to let him manage to grow some luck. I slammed another clip into the Garand, squeezed off 3 more shots, and whoever was at the window popped back down. That's when I caught the movement on the hillside from the corner of one eye. A young man stood up, aiming a rifle. I swung the muzzle of my Garand around too late and felt something slam into my side. It felt like I'd been hit hard with a baseball bat in the ribs. I twisted and put the trunk of the tree between him and me. I eased down among the roots of the poplar, thinking moss-snug thoughts and keeping a wary eye on the cabin. I could feel something wet on the ground soaking into my shirt. I told myself that it was only a sprinkle of morning dew. A cardinal softly sang. For a moment I lay there in the quiet of the deep woods, watching that bird flit red and happy like a bright feathered flame through the thick green boughs. They would come at me fast once they had worked up the nerve to try. That was when things would get dicey. It was easy to plunk shots at a cabin. It was much harder to nail a running target, especially one that was coming straight at you and most likely firing back. I couldn't see the man on the hill, but I knew he had to be up there, and it was him that worried me the most. I worked my way backwards, leaving a trail of blood in the grass. Turned out it wasn't morning dew at all. I kept my eye on the hill the whole time. Then, when I felt comfortable in my firing position, I eased one of the grenades from off my belt and lobbed it down toward the house. The grenade went off with a satisfying thunder, followed by the rattle of fragmented steel. Maybe that cabin wasn't going to stand 100 years more. Just then, the front door of the cabin slammed open. The man on the hill stood up and fired off 2 more shots. I steadied myself and let the breath ease out of my lungs, and in mid-ease, I brought the sights of the big Garand squarely into the middle meat of my opponent's chest. I fired 2 shots, and both of them hit, and he fell to the ground and rolled slowly down the hill like a young boy playing his last game of tag on this earth. Then I pulled the .45 and I angled it back over my shoulder, aiming for the 4 men who were coming out of the cabin. I waited until they were close enough to hit. I got 2 of them before the .45 was empty. One of the 2 remaining survivors fell back and kneeled down by a cord of poorly stacked firewood. He would have been smarter to keep coming at me. The 2 of them could have rushed me and took me down. They had lost their opportunity. I raised the Garand up, and I planted a pair of 30-06 nails into his braver brother's coffin. The one hiding behind the cordwood stood up with his rifle held above his head. I smiled at him, all the time thinking about how long they had let Luther Webster's body lay there. All the time thinking about Sally Mae Webster's stubborn refusal to cry. "Come on up then," I told him, after I had slung my Garand and reloaded my .45. "Keep that rifle up over your head. It might be you need the exercise to help you live a little bit longer." I watched him walk towards me. As he walked, I put my hand down on what was left of Luther's chest. I picked a few loose maggots from him and I flung them into the dirt. I dug a little deeper. The boy was nearly up the hill when I found what I was looking for. I kept it hidden, smiling at him. It was easy, because he wasn't more than 22 years old, just about as old as I had been when I knelt in that blood and floodwater-filled foxhole, staring out at those Koreans. "That's an awfully nice rifle you got there," I told him. That's a .22 Winchester now, isn't it? The boy nodded like he thought his head might fall from off his shoulders if he wasn't careful, and nodded too hard. Why don't you throw that .22 Winchester down in the dirt over there, now that you've showed it to me? He threw it. He didn't think twice about doing it either. There's a blanket in that pack, I told the boy. You break 2 good lengths of poplar off and tie that blanket to it. You can make yourself a rough sort of travois.
What?
The boy said. Kids today, I really don't know what they were teaching them. Didn't he ever read a Louis L'Amour novel? Didn't he even go to Boy Scouts? So I told him what to do and watched while he did it. Then, after he had Luther in the blanket part of the homemade travois, I told the boy to start dragging his way towards Sally Mae's cabin. It took us longer to get back than it had for me to get there, but we did it just the same. Sally Mae was waiting by the grave. She dressed Luther in his best clothes, ignoring the mess of what was left of him. While she was at it, I got that boy to dig a grave in the field out back amongst the tall grass and fat, heavy walnut tree that would offer shade to Luther and Sally when the sun beat down. Then I had him drag the coffin that Sally had bought and kept in the barn. He dropped it once, but I hit him hard enough to keep him careful until he got the coffin into the grave hole. Then I had the boy fetch out the 8-track player that I had brought with me in the trunk of the car. I kept the Garen trained on him the whole time through.
We need a plug for it to play, don't we?
The boy asked of the 8-track player, staring at it like it was some kind of a fossilized relic from out of the Stone Age. It's got batteries, I assured him. Now help her get Luther into that grave hole.
Help who?
I took 3 precise steps toward the boy, brought the Garen down and caught him with the butt of it, smack dab against his jawbone. I nearly broke it in 2. The boy fell to the dirt. I leaned over and looked down at him. His name was Master Sergeant Luther Webster, I told him. He was my best friend. He was a man who fought for his country, and he shot and killed many brave men in more battles than a know-nothing flea pimple like you could ever dream of in your worst nightmare. That is a name that you should commit to memory, seeing as how you put this man where he is today.
I had to put him in that coffin.
The boy stammered through the blood that was spilling from out of his mouth.
You told me to.
I fished the round out of my pocket, the round that I had rooted out of Luther's open wound. This looks like a .22 caliber long, I said quietly. The very same as that gun you were carrying. I saw 3 shotguns and a .303 Enfield, and a .44 Marlin that was most likely stolen. I saw a .38 caliber revolver, and an axe and a chunk of firewood. So far as I could tell, you were the only one out there carrying a .22 rifle. The boy opened his mouth. He closed it again before more blood could spill out. In between the open and the close, no words fell out. Stand up, I told him. It took a bit of doing, but he stood. Salute, damn it, I told him. He saluted. It looked more like a cross between someone shading his eyes from the sun and somebody wiping a tear from their eye. It wasn't right. Never mind saluting, I told him. Just put your right hand over your heart. You can manage that, can't you? I stepped back and pressed the 8-track on button. A bugler sounded taps. I raised my rifle and fired. 8 rounds. Reloaded. 8 more rounds. Sally Mae was crying by now, the tears running down her sunburned cheekbones like a gentle goodbye rain. I was thinking about Luther standing over my foxhole firing his BAR like it was the last thing on earth he would do. Then I thought of him lying there in the dirt where the Bates boys had left him to lie. I reloaded and fired 3 more times. I hit the back of the boy's right hand all 3 times. The 3 rounds passed right through his hand, his heart, and what passed for a backbone. The boy fell to the dirt. I dragged him over and rolled him into the grave hole. Then I shoveled dirt until it was done. Sally Mae helped me towards the end of it. Afterwards, I stumbled to the front porch of her house and laid down on the wind-blown floorboards. I looked up at the sky.
That shirt is going to need washing,
Sally Mae said. Not before I finished dying in it, I replied. Then I closed my eyes. I heard that cardinal sing, and I wondered to myself if it was right or not.
The last night before the world ended. Even so close to midnight, the unseasonable heat and humidity clings to the night air with a ferocious grip. Though only 1 week until Christmas, the temperature feels like mid-September. Regina Parker groans. Enduring 1 summer per year in Arkansas is enough. The second she turns off the motor, familiar wetness pools underneath her arms and vest. Only 3 other vehicles are in the parking lot of the police department. The black Dodge Charger is hers, and the tan Ford minivan belongs to the city of Rockport's only radio dispatcher, Eugenia Jeannie Renfro. An old Chevy truck held together by rust, and a southern favorite, duct tape, sits directly in front of the station. Regina chuckles to herself, wondering how much longer the old hunk of metal had before leaving its owner, Officer Roger Singleton, stranded on the side of the road. Once inside the station, she hears Jeannie and Roger whining about the warm temperature in the front office.
I swear I'm just going to turn into a big old pile of damn clothes. A nice cool winter is supposed to be our reward for tolerating hotter than Hades summers.
My grandma surely agrees with you on that count, Miss Jeannie. I'd lay money down she's eaten 2 whole boxes of popsicles in the last 3 days. Regina walks up to the duo and joins the conversation. Weather report on the radio earlier said temps should return to normal by Wednesday. They said there's a 30% chance of snow on Christmas Eve. Jeannie crinkles her nose and laughs. A damp lock of overprocessed blonde hair flops onto her chubby cheek.
This is Arkansas. Weather can change in the blink of an eye. Evening, Chief Parker.
Roger tips the worn-out Stetson toward Regina. Evening, boss lady. How was it tonight? Regina reaches past the youngest of Rockport's 2 other law enforcement officers and hands her ticket book to Jeannie. At only 24, Roger Singleton is young enough to be Regina's son. Fairly quiet until round 8. That's when Kirk Sorrells decided to test out his latest batch of moonshine. I'm never going to get the image of his flabby naked ass running down Highway 270. Corralling him into my unit might require extensive therapy to forget. I'm giving serious consideration to adding a plastic cover over the back seat. Is he in the hole? Roger grins and motions toward the single holding cell at the back of the building. Yep, sleeping it off. I didn't feel like taking him all the way to county. Figured the less time he spent naked in my back seat, the better. I cited him for public indecency. When he wakes up, he can go home. You didn't give him a public intox charge? Roger asks. Giving the old fart another expensive charge isn't going to make him stop drinking. Only rehab will. I plan on talking to Judge Harmon about that tomorrow morning. The man's already living hand to mouth. Taking more money from Kirk's pocket will just drive him to work harder on his side business and drink even more. That ain't like you, Chief. Your change of heart wouldn't have anything to do with Jesse's troubles, would it? Regina bristles at the mention of her daughter. Most of the time, Regina enjoys living and working in the small town with a population of less than 1,000, except for moments like now. The many perks of the quaint town keep her from moving to a bigger city, along with strong family ties to the rural area. She is the 5th generation born and raised in the tiny burg, and the first female and second family member to hold the title of Chief of Police. Unfortunately, the flip side of living in a small town is everyone's business, is everyone's business. The gossip train travels at breakneck speed. Within an hour after taking a strung-out Jesse to Brightwater's treatment center in North Little Rock, all of Rockport knew. Dozens of concerned citizens called to offer their condolences and support. Several of the ladies from First Baptist brought over enough casseroles and salads to last Regina 2 full weeks. They even held hands and prayed for God to take away Jesse's cravings for meth. Shaking off the horrible memory, she answers Roger's question. Maybe. I've learned quite a bit about how addiction works lately in counseling. One of the top spots on the list is financial stressors. Addicts don't handle life's little ups and downs very well. Money trouble is sometimes a trigger. Old Kirk needs rehab, not jail time or additional bills to pay. He's been out of work for going on 3 years ever since the sawmill closed. Roger cocked his head, a look of shock across his face. I'll be. Never thought I'd hear those words leave your mouth. If anyone asks me about your change of heart, I'll tell them it's from this god-awful heat. Wouldn't want our citizens to think their hard-nosed chief of police is getting all sentimental in her old age. Gee, thanks. Have a good shift. Stay safe. Regina waves to both before walking outside and over to the Charger. Slipping behind the wheel, she grins as the 5.7-liter engine rumbles to life. A lump of sadness sticks in the pit of her stomach because the house will be empty. God, how she misses Jesse. She refuses to cry. Enough tears were shed the day she left Jesse in rehab. Her daughter had bounced between rage-fueled screams of hatred to tear-filled pleas for her mother not to leave her. The look of terror and fear on Jesse's face when Regina walked out the doors made her chest clench with sorrow. By the time she made it to the car, the racking sobs were so intense she couldn't do a thing except lean against the doorframe and squall like a lost kitten. Not gonna do it. No crying today. Regina cranks up the radio. Catch-scratch fever blares throughout the interior. At the top of her voice, she belts out the words alongside Ted Nugent, grateful for the distraction. 5 minutes later, she pulls up into the driveway of the small 3-bedroom house she shares with Jesse. Turning off the car, she stared at the place. Christmas is gonna suck this year, she mutters while biting her lip to keep from crying. I miss you, Fred. So much. Maybe you could have kept Jesse from using drugs. I sure failed. Damn it. This wasn't how we had planned things. I need you here. Doing all this alone is gonna break me right in two. Her cell phone buzzes. Exiting the car, she smiles. Ever since they were born, the bond between her and Reed was sometimes eerie. Your timing is perfect as usual. I was on the verge of a major pity party. One of the many perks of being a twin is sensing disturbances in our mutual force. Reed's laughter is deep and throaty. So, you home now? How was your shift? Unlocking the front door, Regina flicks on the lights and holds in a deep sigh. Hearing Reed makes her miss his presence. He had moved to Laredo, Texas over 25 years ago after joining U.S. Customs and Border Patrol. When Fred was still alive, they made the yearly trek to Laredo for Christmas. The tradition ended when Fred died. I'm sure not quite as exciting as yours. Aren't you supposed to be keeping our borders safe from drugs and bad guys? Only on days I'm at work. Regina stops in mid-stride as goosebumps sprout across her arms and neck. You aren't in Laredo, are you? Don't tell me you drove over 700 miles. Racing to the front room, she pushes the curtains back, stunned to see headlights blink twice, then shut off. Tossing her phone onto the couch, she opens the door and steps outside as Reed climbs out from behind the wheel of his SUV. In seconds, his hulking 6 feet 4-inch frame lumbers up the driveway to the porch. He flings his beefy arms around Regina's shoulders. You should have told me you were coming. You know, giving me a chance to cook or... Reed smiles while holding up a sack of food with a big red bow on top. The smells wafting from inside gives away the fact it is Italian. Which is exactly why I didn't give you fair warning. You can't cook for squat. Here, take this inside so I can get my bags. Ass. Wait, bags? And what's the deal with the freaking bow? Your way of saying Italian takeout is what you got me for Christmas? Yes, bags. They come in quite handy when someone moves, to store all your belongings in. Ain't no way I'd let the movers handle my treasured collection of hats and boots. Regina looks down at the bag and notices a note. Reaching inside the door, she flicks on the porch light and peers at the paper. Written in her brother's atrocious scrawl, it read, "An Italian feast to celebrate my retirement." You? Retired? Boots? Hats? Are you moving back for good? Yep, I need to be here to help my niece. Oh, and her mother. She's sort of a scatterbrain at times. Then again, the bowl of lemons she's been handed hasn't helped much. The way I figured, she needed someone rough and tough to lean on. Remember all the years you've given me grief about not marrying or having kids, and I always said I had my reasons? Well, taking care of you and yours would be one of the answers. Reed grins and walks past her, turning his body sideways while passing through the threshold. Dumbstruck, Regina stares at his rigid back. She cannot believe he's home. Rather than bursting into tears from the amazing turn of events, she resorts to humor in an emotional situation. Glad you're here, bro. However, if you start snoring, you're sleeping on the porch. Reed laughs. Fair enough. Same goes for you. Now, enough chatting. Time to eat. I've been on the road a long time and I'm starved. Shaking her head at the crazy turn of events, Regina heads to the kitchen to fix their plates. Grateful, her twin is by her side. The day the world broke. Regina, you decent? Regina answers her brother's question. Just lacing up my boots. Come on in. Reed opens the bedroom door and scoots inside, shutting it behind him. His face is pale, jaw clenched tight. Regina's gaze falls to his waist, noticing he's wearing a loaded gun on his hip. What's wrong? You haven't watched or listened to any news today, have you? No, I've been up a total of 10 minutes, which included my shower. Reed joins Regina on the bed, setting her cell phone between them. The station called you numerous times, so I figured something was up and answered while you were in the shower. Jeannie said there's a big pile up on I-30 involving an 18-wheeler and several vehicles, multiple casualties. Damn, I hate those big rigs. God, I hope no kids are... Hush, Regina. Listen, the accident isn't why I came in here. Sensing something's wrong, she goes into cop mode. Then why did you? News reports are flooding in from all over the world. There's something going on, not just here, but everywhere, and no one can give a plausible answer to what's behind it. Behind what? Power outages, fires, explosions, riots, and people walking around who shouldn't be. Regina scowls. If that little joke was your way to help me deal with all the carnage from a semi-accident, I don't find it funny. Shut up and listen. You need to see what I mean. Words simply won't suffice. Crossing the room, Reed turns on the small TV to CNN. A jerky image from a cell phone video appears. A passenger inside a car with an arm stuck out the window is filming an accident on the freeway. Mangled, twisted metal is strewn out across several lanes, glass and debris spread even further. Tendrils of smoke rise from the demolished vehicles. A man crouches over and shovels the innards of a dead female EMT into his mouth. Another EMT comes into view and tries to distract the man. When he looks up, his face is covered in blood and gore. A large piece of metal protrudes through his neck. An even bigger one pierces the chest cavity. The video zooms in, and Regina sees his eyes are solid black. And his neck is broken. Regina gasps and covers her mouth with both hands. The other EMT has a stun gun. When he gets close enough to strike, the man with the mortal injuries jumps over the corpse he had just been munching on like it was a hurdler in the Olympics. Latching his broken, bloody fingers around the EMT's arm holding the weapon, his head juts forward as he sinks his teeth onto the man's neck. Blood spurts out, coating them both and the ground in seconds. Regina's gaze falls to the ticker at the bottom of the screen. It reads, Phoenix motorist captures video of injured man attacking rescuers on Interstate 10. Arizona governor deploys National Guard. All travel, including air and vehicle, has been halted in Arizona. Stay tuned for similar videos from New York, Seattle, Los Angeles, Afghanistan, and China. President Thompson to address the nation at... Oh my God! It's happening across the entire globe? How? Why? No fucking way. Shaking, Regina grabs her belt and jacket, motioning for Reed to turn the TV off. Brother, please go get my daughter. I've got a town to protect. I know. Reed nods. Go. I promise to get her. You just take care of the citizens. And yourself. Thank you. They lock gazes, and each senses the absolute fear of the other. Adrenaline in overdrive, Regina bolts from the house. Once inside the cruiser, she secures the wireless headset, refusing to use the radio, fully aware citizens are probably monitoring communications. Using voice commands, she calls the station while backing out of the driveway.
It's about damn time, Chief. Things are crazy here.
Jeannie yells. I understand there's an accident on I-30. Which mile marker?
98, right at the start of the construction. State boys are already there. Roger and Clint are helping with traffic control.
Regina flicks on the lights without the siren. I'll let them handle it. On my way. Should be there in less than 2 minutes. Jeannie clears her throat.
Good, because you just received an email marked urgent from the governor.
Regina blows through a stoplight. What does it say?
I can't open it. Oh, another just arrived. Says a code will be sent.
Regina's phone beeps with an incoming text. The message contains a long stream of numbers. To my phone. Yeah, just got it.
What's going on, Chief? You know I don't put too much stock in what I see or hear on the news because most of it is crap. But what I saw earlier, it was like watching a horror movie.
Regina pulls into the parking lot. Exiting the car, she runs inside. Jeannie's face is pale and her eyes the size of saucers. Calm down, Jeannie. Let me see what the governor sent, and then we'll sort through all this mess. If something bad is happening, we need to stay strong. Residents will be panicked enough. They'll need someone with a cool head to keep things together, okay? Jeannie stands so Regina can sit.
Okay.
Go get some coffee or water, stretch your legs, and take a breather. Without a word, Jeannie heads to the kitchen. Regina waits until she hears the rattle of cups before opening the email. She enters the password from the text and waits. In seconds, another box opens. She leans closer to read the screen. The National Guard has been deployed. As of 6:05 a.m., I implemented the Arkansas Emergency Operations Plan. As you know, the AREOP is designed to reduce vulnerability and loss of life and damage to property during any form of disaster or crisis. We are working in conjunction with federal authorities. Our goal is to rapidly respond and assess the current nationwide catastrophe. The situation is a large-scale event, requiring all levels of government take proactive measurements to respond. As such, I have directed all members of the Highway Patrol to secure all roads coming into and out of our state. No residents will be allowed to leave this state until all citizens are accounted for and tested. Representatives from the State Health Department will arrive in each county seat in less than an hour. All local and county law enforcement agencies are to instruct every citizen of their respective jurisdiction to report to the local high school, which will serve as the joint field office until containment is reached. Once a citizen is tested and deemed clear, they may return home, but must remain in their local area until all 75 counties have completed the testing. Residents who test positive must be immediately quarantined. The National Guard will take charge of each county jail. Citizens who test positive will be moved to the jail. Biohazard suits are to be worn during the entire operation. Regina rereads the entire statement twice. The words on the screen send waves of fear pulsating through her body. Dear God, what the hell is going on? She hears Jeannie coming down the hall, so she hits the print button and then closes the email, deleting it as instructed. Fingers shaking as she picks up the pages off the printer, she shoves them into her jacket pocket and stands.
So what did... Oh shit, you look like a ghost just passed through you. Are we under attack from another demented group from overseas? Did someone hit us with a dirty bomb or bio-attack?
Forcing her voice to remain calm, Regina motions for Jeannie to sit. I need you to listen to me. You are going to be very busy in the next few minutes. Swamped, actually. AREOP has been enacted. Get Roger and Clint on the radio. Tell them to return to this station immediately. I need their help getting everyone over to the high school. EBS will activate in 5 minutes, instructing everyone to go there. People are going to flip and start calling to ask why. Do not try and answer their questions. Just repeat the edict to go to the school. Got it? Jeannie's bottom lip trembles.
What if they want to talk to you? Ask you what's going on?
Regina heads down the hallway to the closet housing extra firearms.
Just reiterate, they need to go to the high school. They'll be safe there. If someone pressures you for more, hang up.
Before Jeannie can respond, the phone rings. Though a seasoned 20-year dispatcher, Jeannie hesitates before reaching out to grab the receiver.
911, what's your emergency?
Unlocking the closet, Regina yanks a shotgun from the rack and loads it with shells. Inside the small space, she whispers,
God help us. This isn't happening.
Her cell phone vibrates. Looking down to see who is calling, a cold shiver races up her spine as she answers.
I don't need to ask you why you're calling. You got the same email.
Sheriff Roger Calhoun clears his throat. The sound of radio chatter in the background makes the hairs stand up on Regina's neck.
Yep, some nerdy-looking fools dressed like they're ready to walk on the moon just arrived, along with armed military escorts. They just waltzed in here and took over my jail. Bastards had the nerve to tell me and my deputies to leave. Jim Grayson demanded to know what was going on. Get this, one of the soldiers handcuffed him and went to lock him up.
Forcing herself not to sound frightened at the tone in the sheriff's voice, Regina asks,
Went to lock him up? What, did the soldier change his mind?
No, the guy in the drunk tank did.
Sheriff, just spit out what you're trying to say. Time's wasting.
Fine. You know Ricky Baber, right?
Doesn't every law official in this county? Biggest crackhead around, and I'm pretty sure he's the one who got my daughter hooked on meth. Why?
Picked him up last night after he rolled his truck. He didn't seem to have any injuries, but guess we were wrong.
What happened?
My deputy and his military escort found him face down in the cell. When they went in to check on him, he jumped up off the floor and attacked Jim and the soldier. Ricky tore Jim's lips and nose off before the grunt shot him in the head. It was utter chaos.
Holy shit.
Sheriff Calhoun lowers his voice.
We tried to take Jim to the hospital, but the guys in white took him away. Wouldn't tell us where they were taking him or why. When I tried to intervene, one of those bastards stuck a rifle in my face.
A sense of dread crawls through Regina's mind. Let's finish this discussion once we get everybody to the school, okay? Ears might be listening.
Agreed. See you at the school. Oh, and Parker.
Yes?
Stay safe.
You too, Sheriff. Regina disconnects the call, mind spinning from the news. Part of her feels a twinge of satisfaction, a sense of justice, knowing Ricky Baber is dead. The other part wonders if he was like the disgusting thing she had seen on the news earlier. Dead, yet moving. Still in the dark as to what is really going on, the terror of the situation almost consumes her. Forcing it deep down inside, she pulls herself together because now is not the time to freak out. Her family, friends, neighbors, and even strangers in Rockport need her to remain calm. After loading 3 weapons, she hears Roger's terrified voice crackle from the mic on her shoulder.
Need backup. Shots fired. Officers down. Repeat, officers down. Bullets aren't stopping him. Oh my God.
Without thinking or saying a word to Jeannie, Regina grabs a shotgun and runs out the front door. Letting her training and instincts take over, using the fear pulsing inside as fuel to her muscles, Regina turns on the lights and siren on the cruiser and barrels out of the parking lot, damn near sideswiping a Humvee. Glancing in the rearview mirror to see if any of the vehicles change direction and follow, she let out a sigh of relief. They ignore her and continue toward the high school. After the request for backup from Roger, the radio is silent, which is even more unnerving than Roger's terrified pleas for help. An eerie sense of foreboding settles over her mind. Lines of vehicles leading into downtown Malvern clog the southbound lane of Highway 270. The entire county is home to less than 34,000 people, yet judging by the heavy congestion, it seems half of them are on the road. Some of the motorists she recognizes as residents of Rockport. In less than 2 minutes, Regina crosses the bridge over I-30 and glances over her left shoulder. The accident shut down both lanes of the freeway. The flashing blue strobes of numerous units dot the area, interspersed with red lights from a fire truck and ambulance. She looks right and notices a county unit blocking the interstate about 100 yards away, holding back a throng of vehicles stretching out for miles toward Benton. Reaching the entrance ramp, Regina turns onto the freeway and pulls up behind a state trooper's unit. Scanning the area, a cold shiver races up her spine. A jackknifed big rig is close to 100 yards up ahead, the contents of the trailer strewn across both the east and westbound lanes. A crumpled SUV nearly split in two is less than 10 feet from the rig. Deflated airbags coated in red hang limp on the driver and passenger sides. What had once been a sedan of some sort is on its side in the median about 20 feet away. Glass, metal, and liquid cover the entire area around the site of impact. Up ahead about 50 yards sit both Roger and Clint's units, each empty. Where the hell is everyone? Leaving the car running, she steps out into the cold morning air, shotgun in hand. Pausing to listen, she hears nothing but the rumble of engines in the distance. The eerie silence is unsettling. Accident scenes, especially ones involving numerous vehicles, are usually a flurry of noise and activity. Gas, burned rubber, and the unmistakable odor of eviscerated bowels mix with the coppery scent of blood, making Regina's nose twitch. Though used to the stench from working hundreds of accidents over the course of her career, each time around the foulness, her stomach twists into a knot. She contemplates using the radio to reach Roger or Clint, yet some primal instinct in the back of her mind urges her to remain quiet. Raising the shotgun, she walks over to the unit in front of her, aims steady and sure. The white Charger with blue stripes is about 10 feet away, the driver's door wide open. No one is inside, so she continues toward the ambulance about 15 yards ahead. After passing the front of the cruiser, Regina stops short when she hears a strange noise. It takes several seconds to recognize the sound. No way. Shifting her approach so she is hidden by the open doors, Regina holds her breath. Edging closer to the back of the ambulance, she keeps her steps quiet, sidestepping debris on the pavement. The gurgling, crunching noises grows louder. Regina feels her stomach revolt, threatening to release its contents all over Interstate 30. The world around her stops when she peeks around the open door into the interior of the ambulance. Two mangled bodies, presumably victims from the wreck, are loaded onto gurneys in the back. The one on the left looks like a young female, maybe 20 or so. The right side of her head is crushed in, glass and debris embedded in her neck. Mounds of blood mat a once beautiful head full of dark hair. No more blood oozes from the mortal injuries, indicating her heart no longer beats. The other one is male. Both are strapped in, ready for transport to the hospital, IVs already in place. The man's face is a mutilated mess. His lower abdomen sports a gaping wound, and Regina sees part of his internal organs are exposed. A large chunk of flesh is missing from his left forearm. For some reason, Regina flashes back to the video of the accident on I-10 in Phoenix. Looks like a bite. Bile burns up her throat as she realizes the man's jaw continues to open and close as he bites at the air, his shattered teeth clicking together. On the floor between them is an EMT, or what once had been one. The body cavity is ripped open, and a middle-aged woman dressed in jeans and a Texas Longhorn t-shirt hovers over the corpse. Regina blinks twice in shock as she watches the thing tear out a handful of intestines and shove them into her mouth. Body and mind frozen in horror, she feels the axis of her world. Everything she knows and has experienced until this very moment shift. A human being is eating another human. A dead human being is trying to bite the air. Don't say it. Don't even fucking think it. No wonder the military is taking over and insisted everyone be tested. This can't be happening. I've got to be at home dreaming, God, please let me be experiencing a nightmare to end all nightmares. In those few seconds, while staring at things that simply cannot be, all she can think about is Jesse and Reed. The two most important people in her life are in danger, along with, it seems, everyone else in the world. Her survival instincts take over, shoving all the disturbing sights and sounds aside to be dealt with later. If this is a dream, it is time for me to kick some fucking ass. Hey, gut muncher, want some fresher meat? The bloody monstrosity that once was a living, breathing female jerks its head at the sound. Regina notices the eyes are solid black and her skin is a strange mottled gray color. She doesn't hesitate. There is no humanity left in the expression. The dead eyes are primal. Crimson-covered lips, oozing blood from its meal, curl into a snarl. The thing hisses while lunging. Eat this! The recoil from the shotgun blast causes her entire body to shudder and ears ring. The body flies backward, smashing into the gurneys, and then crumbles into a pile on the floor of the ambulance. The spray pattern from the shotgun at such close range removes 90% of her head, leaving only a few strips of flesh sticking up around the neck bone. Pausing only long enough to ensure the destroyed mass of flesh is dead, again, Regina pumps another round into the chamber and heads toward her men's vehicles. I always knew you was a smart gal, Chief. Take the head off. It's the only way. Just like in the comics and movies. Who knew? Regina spins around at the sound of a familiar voice. Shit! I damn near blew your head off, Clint. Officer Clint Chesterton stumbles forward before collapsing onto the cold pavement. Regina runs to his side. The back of his dark blue jacket is shredded apart, and she sees sections of his exposed skin are full of deep, ugly claw marks. Large chunks of flesh are missing where his kidneys are located. Blood soaks his shirt and pants. Too much blood. Bending down next to him, she notices a pool of red mixed with saliva forming by his mouth. It spreads out across the ground, already the size of an orange. She scans the area for any more undead visitors. Seeing none, she leans the shotgun against the ambulance and hoists Clint off the ground. Just hang on, son. I'll get you to the hospital as soon as I find Roger. Clint spits out a mouthful of blood at the same time he tries to say something. Regina shushes him. I'm gonna put you in the back seat for a minute until I secure this area. Any idea where he and the others might be? Last I saw him, he was helping Hightower and Reynolds. They were on the back side of the semi. The driver was trapped inside and they were all working on trying to get him out. I was helping the EMTs load up the gurneys when I heard Roger yell for help. Took off running in their direction. But by the time I made it, well, shit went down fast. Regina's mouth is dry. She forces her lips to move. Then what? It was a waste of time. The guys were surrounded. Surrounded? By those things? How many? You saying you think Roger's dead? Clint groans as Regina leans him against the hood of her unit. Pausing long enough to grab the mic on her shoulder, she radios for backup. No response other than the continual static. She tries again, requesting an ambulance. Nothing. Where the hell is Jeannie? After unlocking the back door, she eases Clint into the seat. He moans once and answers, Yeah, I think so. There were 4 of those things surrounding them all. They attacked at the same time. They were so fast. I took aim but didn't fire. Afraid I'd shoot Roger. Right when one knocked him to the ground, I heard something behind me, but turned around too late. It jumped me from behind. Oh God, did you kill it? Clint leans his head against the seat and winces. Yeah, but not before it, whatever the hell you call it, tore me up. Unloaded my Glock until it quit tearing me apart. Found out taking its head off was the trick. Just like on TV. Who knew those crazy people in Hollywood were right on the money? Regina watches tears run down the boy's face. Clint's skin is pale and clammy. A fleeting memory of the day she interviewed him flashes by. He had been just a few months shy of turning 22, all muscle and attitude, ready to get on the streets and make a difference in the community he had grown up in. A former football star at Malvern High School, Clint Chesterton had been a textbook jock. He had skated through classes, his teachers looking the other way when he turned in homework, obviously not a product of his own. Clint's sole focus was getting a football scholarship to Fayetteville to play for the Razorbacks. The lifelong dream of the only son of Harold and Jeannie Chesterton ended the final game of his senior year after Clint suffered a torn ACL and broken left foot. The image of him sitting across from her while begging for a chance to have a real career makes Regina's heart pound with grief. She had wanted to say no, tell him he wasn't ready, yet in the end she caved. Something behind his big brown eyes struck a sensitive spot inside her heart. Against her better judgment, she decided to give the kid a chance. Now, as she stares at his life-altering injuries, Regina regrets the decision. A gash about 6 inches long starts at his temple and ends under his chin. She sees milky white sections of his skull and cheekbone. A steady stream of red leaks from it, dripping onto the collar of his jacket. She takes off her own and presses it against the wound, and then guides his hands to take over. His breathing is short and shallow as his lungs fill with fluid. From the sounds I heard from the others, they didn't make it either. Listen. Clint reaches out a bloody hand and grabs Regina's. She winces at how cold it is. I've got maybe half-hour tops. Don't worry about me none. I've already made peace with my maker. After what I saw earlier, I ain't sure I want to stick around for what's coming next. Go. See if you can help the others. Taking me to the hospital will be a wasted trip because I'm a goner. Just be careful, Chief. Those things are fast. And hungry. Don't talk like that, son. I'll get you. Clint's grip intensifies as he interrupts. No, you won't. Just promise me to get my parents out of here. Please. Chief, don't let one of those monsters get to my mom and dad. Promise? Regina doesn't have time to answer Clint's request. Movement to her right catches her attention. Shutting the door, she spins around and pulls her Glock. Her hands shake while she plants her feet and takes aim at the grotesque monster that had once been Officer Roger Singleton. Son of a bitch, this ain't happening. Tears run down her cheeks as she pulls the trigger, wondering how she'll tell Mary Louise Singleton she had to shoot her already dead grandson in the head. Before Roger's corpse hits the ground, the tornado siren rings. Looking up into the cloudless sky, she wonders if she's losing her mind. Choking back the sobs as she watches her friend bleed out onto the roadway from the bullet she put into him, she forces herself not to succumb to the urge to collapse into a ball and cry. The emergency wail cuts short and is replaced by a robotic voice. All residents of Hot Spring County are to report to Malvern High School. You have 10 minutes to comply before house-to-house searches begin. The message ends and the siren trills again, sending its loud waves across the expanse of Hot Spring County. Regina refuses to look at Roger's corpse and steps away from her car toward the fire truck up ahead. She cannot live with herself if she doesn't check on the others before leaving. Her altruistic intentions vanish at the sight of several people. No, things crossing the interstate. They are all heading toward the source of the noise blaring above them. Regina's heart skips a beat. Jeannie. The closest siren is less than 100 feet from the station. She tries the radio on her shoulder. The results are the same. Nothing. Regina focuses her gaze on the bloody, strange moving bodies. The rising sun glints off the badges of 2 of them, and that is confirmation enough. Spinning around, she jumps into her car. Glancing at the rearview mirror, she sees Clint's eyes are closed, hands still holding her jacket against his head. Hang on, Clint. I'll get you to the hospital in a flash. Just hang on. Clint responds with a slight nod. Jerking the wheel left, she makes a half turn and crosses the grass-covered median. Once on the other side and on the exit ramp, she floors it. Back on 270, Regina slows down while navigating around the throng of stalled vehicles. Some people stand outside or lean against their hoods, talking nervously to their fellow neighbors. Regina's stomach roils. They are in immediate danger, and they do not have a clue, and she's only one person. How in the hell can she help an entire community? Worried they may not be interested in any more instructions from the government, she opts for a different tactic. Turning on the outside speakers, Regina barks into the microphone. "This is Chief Parker of Rockport PD. Get back inside your vehicles, roll up the windows, and lock your doors. Right now, danger is coming from I-30 East. If you are armed, shoot the head. Repeat, shoot the head." The reaction is immediate. Residents jump back into their vehicles. A few hesitate while looking toward the freeway. Regina makes it to the center lane and guns it. The hospital is less than 3 miles up ahead in the middle part of old downtown Melbourne. The streets are barricaded and a large contingent of armed military personnel are in the way. They stand guard at the red light at the intersection of Cross and Highway 270, blocking the path to the hospital. Cars inch forward as IDs are checked before allowing residents to proceed to the high school. "Shit," Regina whispers. Fearing Clint may have heard the fear in her voice, she quickly adds, "Almost there, Clint." The sick mewling grumble she heard while at the accident site on the freeway hits Regina's ears. Before she can react, Clint's fingers poke through the partition and grabs a handful of her hair. He pulls with such force, Regina's head smashes into the metal separating the front and back sections of the patrol car. Slamming on the brakes, the force and momentum frees her from Clint's fingers after a large chunk of her hair rips out. In a state of panic, Regina throws the car into park and jumps out. She's greeted by a swarm of soldiers. One pulls her backward as another takes aim and fires. The glass shatters and Clint's head explodes all over the back seat and rear window. Screams of sheer terror erupt all around the street as residents cringe in horror. Some flee on foot, while others jump back into their vehicles and try to leave the gridlocked road. Regina tries to intervene when the soldier who had grabbed her raises his weapon at an elderly woman 10 feet away. The woman is dazed and confused, tears running down her wrinkled cheeks. She strides toward the barricade and refuses to stop, even when given the order to do so. Without thinking about the consequences, Regina lunges forward and pushes the barrel of the gun to the ground. Before she can say a word in protest, the soldier spins around and brings the butt of the gun directly to the side of her head. The impact knocks her to the ground. Blackness with specks of white dots cloud her vision. Shaking her head, she notices blood spurt out onto the road. She takes in a few gulps of cold air to regain her bearings, ignoring the throbbing pain. Then, all hell breaks loose. Just as the soldiers descend on the crowd, someone yells, "Oh my God, run! The dead are coming this way!" Shots ring out in quick succession and the entire area descends into madness. Regina stands as a throng of the dead too large to count shamble over the rise from the freeway. The teeming mass isn't running, yet still move fast. The soldiers forget all about the fleeing live bodies and concentrate on taking out the dead. "Lord, please take care of my family." Regina pulls out the Glock, reloads, and runs to join the line of defense to protect her hometown, knowing damn well she is too late. They all are too late.
I've lived in Ash Creek most of my adult life, so when I pull into the parking lot of a fast food restaurant that doesn't exist, I am, as you might imagine, more than a little surprised. I'm scared too, but at the same time, hopeful. Maybe I'll finally find what I've been searching for here. Some small measure of peace. I park my Prius between two vehicles that I can't identify. One is a monstrously large sedan that looks like it belongs in the 1950s. Its body shimmering in the sunlight as if it's made from mother of pearl. The other vehicle has 7 wheels and looks like it's been constructed from odds and ends of silvery wire soldered together. The other cars in the lot are equally strange, but I find them comforting rather than upsetting. They're an indication that I've come to the right place. When I get out of my car and take a breath, I find the air has a chemical tang to it, as if an industrial factory is close by. There isn't one to my knowledge, But up until a few moments ago, I didn't believe there was a restaurant here. So what do I know? The asphalt of the parking lot is dry and cracked, and there are no lines painted on it to indicate parking spaces. Vegetation grows upward from the cracks, some of it ordinary grass, but there are also weeds of a kind I can't identify. Sickly yellow-green things that are covered with thistles, and which terminate in round crimson bulbs that glisten wetly. These bulbs sway slowly back and forth, despite the absence of a breeze. I ran over several of these plants while driving into the lot, and I flattened them, the bulbs bursting open like tumors, squirting reddish-brown goo. The substance reminds me of how my daughters used to mix paints when they were little, adding more and more colors until they created a muddy brown soup. It hits me then, as it often does, so strong and unexpected that I'm unable to prepare myself. An image of two girls sitting on a couch, one 12, one 7. My daughters, Nancy and Lauren. Nancy's eyes are wet, but she's smiling, desperately trying to hold back her tears. Lauren is crying openly, tears streaming down her cheeks like tiny waterfalls. The girls are holding hands, fingers interlaced, gripping tightly. It's this detail that hurts my heart the most, I think. I wish this wasn't happening, Lauren wails. I wish this was a dream. Nancy's response to what her father and I have just told them is more restrained, and all the more awful for it. That's okay, she says, lips trembling with the effort of maintaining her smile. It's okay. The memory of their voices, of their shock and pain, nearly drives me to my knees. I can't breathe, and I wonder if the grief and guilt will finally kill me, and I'll fall dead in the parking lot of a place that shouldn't be real. But the memory retreats, and I begin breathing once more. My heart is racing, but I don't think it's going to give out on me this time. I feel as much disappointment as relief from this knowledge. Pandora's is the name of the restaurant, and it's spelled out in large red plastic letters in the front of the building, which, despite the oddities of the parking lot and the vehicles within it, looks pretty much like any fast food joint. Beneath the name is a cartoonish depiction of a wooden box, the lid partway open. Inside, black shadows which almost seem to be swirling, like eddies of dark water. How appetizing, I think. And although I'm still unsteady on my feet, I feel a little better. False bravado is better than none, right? I go inside. The weird chemical tang is strong in here, as if the restaurant itself is producing it. My throat starts to hurt immediately, and my eyes sting. I try not to think about what that odor is or what it might be doing to my body. At first glance, the interior looks the same as any other fast food place. Tiled floors, counter staffed by dull-eyed, uniformed workers, menu above them displaying options and prices, along with photos of what's meant to be tempting food selections. Sandwiches, fries, and shakes, but not the normal offerings. The sandwich meat is greenish and covered with what looks like scales, and the seeds in the bun aren't seeds at all, but rather tiny eyes. The fries look more like small sections of bone sprinkled with salt, and the shake cups are filled with a purple-gray substance that looks like something that's been squeezed out of an infected wound. My stomach lurches, and I almost turn around and get the hell out of there. But then the girls' voices come to me again. I wish this wasn't happening. I wish this was a dream. That's okay. It's okay. I take a deep breath through my mouth so I don't have to smell the chemical stink. And then I approach the counter. The woman at the register is in her 20s, bald with a tattoo of a large purple eye on her forehead. Her left eye remains closed, while her right blinks rapidly and continuously. Her short-sleeved uniform is blue, and she wears a square brown hat shaped like a wooden box. Her name tag reads O-N-D. When she speaks, her voice is bright and chipper, but she doesn't smile. Welcome to Pandora's, where you won't believe what's in the box. Will this be cash, credit, or etheric transfer? I try to speak, but my throat is so raw, thanks to the chemicals in the air, that it takes me a couple of tries to produce sound. I'm actually here to meet someone. Mr. Lim? Owen's right eye stops fluttering just a couple of seconds before starting back up again. She doesn't answer with words, but instead raises her arm and points toward the dining area. Her hands are twisted and lumpy, as if she suffers from severe arthritis, but her face doesn't change expression as she points. I turn my head to look where she's pointing, and I see a dozen people scattered around the dining area, some sitting alone, some with companions. They all look like the sort of people that would drive the strange vehicles outside, but only one captures my full attention. An older man sitting alone and eating a sandwich. A pile of fast food sandwich wrappers on the table before him. Mr. Lim, I presume. I thank Owen, who gives no indication that she hears me, or maybe she simply doesn't care, and I walk over to Mr. Lim's table. The man's body odor hits me when I'm within 5 feet of him. A feral smell, like the scent of big cats in a zoo enclosure. His stink leavens the chemical odor and actually comes as something of a relief. He's a thin man in his 50s, about a decade older than me, and he's wearing an army jacket, jeans, and sneakers. His clothes are worn, colors faded, but overall clean enough. He's several days overdue for a shave, and his bristles are as white as the tangled thatch of hair on his head. There's a TV screen hanging from a ceiling mount. The sound is muted, but instead of news, it's playing a series of black and white images that look like clips from snuff films. Mr. Lim keeps his gaze focused on the screen as he eats, although eating is too nice a word for what he's doing. He is devouring his sandwiches, tearing into them with the speed and ferocity of a starving dog. He has 3 other sandwiches waiting for him on the table, all wrapped in yellow paper. I do a quick count of the crumpled wrappers piled in front of him, and I get 10. Assuming he hasn't been sitting here all day and pacing himself, he's evidently ordered 14 of Pandora's sandwiches for his meal, and while he's eaten the majority of them, it appears his appetite is nowhere near satisfied. I wonder if he's eating the sandwiches with the green-scaled patties, but I decide that I would rather not know. He doesn't look away from the TV to acknowledge my presence, so I stand there, unsure what to do. On the screen, a naked middle-aged man holding an electric drill approaches an equally naked teenage girl, duct-taped to a wooden chair. The terror in her eyes is so strong it's almost a living thing in and of itself. And I cast my gaze downward, unable to bear witness to what happens next. I try to tell myself that it's not real, just some slasher flick. But I know better. I almost leave, but I hear my daughter's voice once more. Maybe because the woman in the video is so young, and my gut cramps in pain. As bizarre and frightening as this place is, it's nothing compared to what that memory does to me. And I stay right where I am. Sit down, Mr. Lim says through a mouthful of food. He still doesn't look at me. I hesitate for a moment, then I sit down opposite him, my back to the TV. He continues eating one sandwich after the other until he's finished. It doesn't take long. When he's done, he wipes a bit of ketchup from the corner of his mouth and licks it off his fingers. At least, I hope it's ketchup. He lowers his gaze to mine then, and I see he has the most beautiful pair of sky blue eyes that I have ever seen. The eyes of an angel. I'm about to introduce myself when he asks, "Who referred you?" His voice sounds normal, but my ears hurt when he speaks, as if his vocal cords transmit an ultrasonic signal that I can't consciously detect. I find my voice faster than I did with owned. Marcia McLean, a friend from high school. She said you helped her and could help me. Said? Yeah? I posted about my problem on social media, just venting. And she sent me a private message about what you did for her and how I could find you. Marcia gave me Pandora's address, but no result came up when I entered it into my GPS app on my phone. I figured it was just a glitch of some kind, and I set out searching for the restaurant. I drove up and down the street 5 times before I finally found it. A gas station was on this corner the first 4 times I drove by, but on the 5th, Pandora's sat where the station had been. Mr. Lim raises and lowers his chin, as if to indicate my answer is satisfactory. Ah, I remember her. He turns halfway in his chair and waves to get Owen's attention. She looks at him blankly, then she nods and shuffles toward the kitchen. He then turns back to me. What's your problem? I tell him about the memory that plagues me. The night Jacob and I told our girls that we were divorcing. I'm their mother. I'm supposed to protect them from hurt, not be the cause of it. When I finish, I feel exposed, as if I've revealed too much. But I have to tell him my story, don't I? How can he help me otherwise? Marcia's problem was similar to mine. She lost her husband to cancer, and she was holding his hand in the hospital room when he died. She didn't regret being there for him, but every night she dreamed of that last moment with him, when it became too much for her to bear any longer. She told a friend, and his friend told her about a man she'd heard of who could solve any problem. A man named Mr. Lim. It took Marcia some time to track him down, but she did. And when she finally met him in person, he was indeed able to help her. Somehow, he removed the memory of her husband's death from her mind, and she slept fine ever since. I pray he can do the same for me. What do you want me to do? Mr. Lim asks. You took away a painful memory from my friend, and I would like you to do the same for me. He looks at me for a moment with those unearthly blue eyes, and then says, I can do that. The relief that fills me is so overwhelming that it's all I can do not to burst into tears. But I'll need you to get something for me first. Before I can ask what it is, Owen approaches the table carrying a tray of fresh sandwiches wrapped in yellow paper. 14 of them. Despite her arthritic-looking hand, she carries the tray without difficulty and sets it in front of Mr. Lim, without looking at either of us or speaking a word before she turns and shuffles back toward the counter. Given the way he was eating before, I expect Mr. Lim to tear the paper off one of the sandwiches and cram it into his mouth. But Instead, he calmly tells me what he wants me to do. When he's finished, he asks if I understand. I don't really, but I'll do whatever it takes to be free of the voices. Satisfied, he picks up one of the sandwiches, unwraps it slowly, almost lovingly, and then falls upon it with an animalistic snarl. As I wrote earlier, I've lived in Ash Creek for a long time, but I grew up on a farm outside a small town called Waldron. It wasn't a very successful farm. My dad inherited it from his father, but his heart just wasn't in it. He didn't like the work and had no head for business. He grew soybeans mostly, and he didn't do a good job of it. By the time I was married and Nancy was born, he'd sold the farm, moved with my mother to a smaller house in town, and started doing odd jobs as a handyman. One summer, when I was 6, I was playing in a field that Dad never planted nor maintained. I was running to the field, laughing as I chased butterflies when my foot snagged on something. Fiery pain shot through my ankle, and I cried out as whatever had hold of me drew taut, sending me falling to the ground face first. I put out my hand to break my fall, and the impact hurt my wrists. But that pain was nothing compared to the agony in my ankle. Crying, teeth gritted, I rolled onto my back and sat up. I bent over to examine my foot and saw my sock and shoe were both covered in blood. There was so much of it, and it was so red that the sight of it almost made me pass out. I sat there whimpering for several moments until I worked up enough courage to examine my wound more closely. Rusty barbed wire was wrapped tight around my ankle. The points caught so deep in my flesh that I imagined they touched the bone. I had no idea where the wire had come from, but later Dad told me there used to be a fence around that field when I was a kid, and the length of wire that caught me must have been left over from that time, lying in the field all those years like the world's most patient serpent, waiting for someone to come along so it could strike. I needed stitches and a tetanus shot, of course, and I walked with a crutch for a couple weeks while the wound healed. Luckily, no tendons were damaged, at least not badly, and I was back to running again before summer's end. But not in that field. Never again. The pain of that rusty wire biting through my skin and muscle down to the bone was the worst I'd ever experienced in my life, including labor with both of my girls. Until the night Jacob and I gave them the news, we'd both hoped never to have to tell them. Until I saw their faces. Until I heard their voices. It's worse in my dreams. There, the memory plays and replays with vivid colors and crisp sound, like an expensive Hollywood production. I don't sleep much. Hell, who am I trying to fool? I hardly sleep at all. You'd think that the memory, painful as it was, would have faded over the years, especially since the girls are grown and in college. Lauren at Northern Kentucky University for her undergrad, Nancy at Wichita State for her graduate degree. But the memory has only become sharper with the passage of time. My brother once told me that's because I have a sick need to punish myself. Maybe so. But knowing that doesn't make the memory go away. I'm careful about what I watch on TV. Commercials are the worst. You never know when kids will be in one. And I'm cautious about the movies I see in theaters. I only go to shows that start after 9 p.m. in the hope I won't run into any parents taking their little ones to see the latest animated extravaganza. But for all my precautions, I still hear my girls' voices throughout the day. So many times, I no longer bother counting. I'm back at Pandora's less than an hour later. I'm carrying a white cardboard box with the logo for Pets and More printed on the side. Mr. Lim is finishing the last of what I assume to be another set of 14 sandwiches. The mound of crumpled wrappers on the table is so large now that there isn't room for them all, and several have fallen to the floor. I wait for him to finish his sandwich. I know it won't take long, but I don't look up at the TV. I don't want to see what it's showing. As before, Mr. Lim pays no attention to me until he's finished. He then glances over at me, and his gaze flicks to the box, and he grins. His teeth are overlarge and so white they gleam. He sweeps the wrappers off the table to make room, and I gently set the box down before him. My heart pounds. My stomach roils with nausea. Mr. Lim leans over the box, closes his eyes, and inhales deeply, as if he's drawing in the scent of a fine wine. He reaches out with trembling hands and opens the box. His lips are moist, and I realize he's drooling. He peers inside, then he turns and gives me an angry glare. "I don't eat anything that's still alive," he says, voice dripping with disgust. "I'm not a savage." He picks up the box and shoves it towards me. I don't want to take it, but Mr. Lim releases the box, and if I don't grab hold of it, the box and its contents will fall to the floor. So I catch it, and there's a panicked scuttling from inside. I look down at the rabbit, black and white fluff ball that looks back up at me with frightened eyes. You can't. What I can do is give you the relief you desire, he says. But I don't work for free. I don't look at Mr. Lim. Instead, I continue looking at the bunny. After the divorce, Nancy and Lauren begged me to get them a pet. But back then, I lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment, and I didn't want to deal with looking after an animal on the days the girls were with their father. And by the time I found myself a new house, the girls were older and had stopped talking about pets. So they never had any growing up. One more regret to add to my list. I wish this wasn't happening. I wish this was a dream. That's okay. It's okay. I take hold of the rabbit by the scruff of its neck and pull it out of the box. I let the box fall to the floor, put one hand around the rabbit's neck, the other hand on its head, and I quickly turn them in opposite directions. There's a snapping sound, and the rabbit spasms once and then falls still. I toss the dead creature onto the table, and Mr. Lim gazes at it for a moment, gorgeous blue eyes shining. Then, he snatches it up and brings it to his mouth. It takes him longer to finish it off than it does a Pandora's sandwich, but that's because he has the fur, bones, and internal organs to deal with too, all of which he eats. When he's done, his army jacket is splattered with crimson, and the lower half of his face is a red smear. As he starts to lick the blood from his fingers, I say, "Now will you do it?" Between finger licks, he glances at me and says, "It's already done." I don't feel any different. and doubt must show on my face, for Mr. Lim sighs and says, "Why did you come to me?" "So you could remove one of my bad memories. The worst one." "Ah, and which one is that?" I open my mouth to reply, but then I realize I have no idea. I remember everything about my interactions with Mr. Lim and the moment I first stepped into Pandora's, but I can't recall which memory I wanted him to take from me. I smile in wonderment. I can't believe it. It's gone. Thank you. Thank you so... He waves away my thanks. Ond approaches with a tray of fresh sandwiches, and Mr. Lim turns his attention to whatever new atrocities are playing out on the TV screen. I take this as my cue to go, only too happy to take my leave of Mr. Lim and this strange place. As I push open the entrance door, a mother and her 2 young daughters enter. The faces of all 3 are mottled, the flesh swollen and gently pulsating. I try not to stare as they pass me, and I continue outside and walk toward my Prius. I don't hear any voices in my head, and I don't know if I should be relieved by that. I'm a phlebotomist, and I took the day off work so I could meet with Mr. Lim. It's still early enough that I could go to the hospital and put in a few hours, but I just feel so good. So much lighter. Then, I decide to take the rest of the day to celebrate. I don't know exactly what burden Mr. Lim relieved me of, but given that I'm so happy I'm almost giddy, I know it has to be a huge one. And no longer being tormented by memory like that is definitely worth celebrating. I feel so great that I don't question how Mr. Lim performed this miracle, or even what he is precisely, or where exactly Pandora's is in relation to what I've always thought of as the real world. In truth, I don't really care about those details, and I suspect that if I had answers to my questions, I wouldn't like them. I'm debating whether to get a relaxing massage at my gym or a strong margarita at my favorite Mexican restaurant when my phone starts buzzing. I left my purse on the floor of my passenger seat both times I went into Pandora's, but I moved it back onto the passenger seat before I left the parking lot. I reach inside, remove the phone, and accept the call without looking to see who it is. Like most people, I usually screen my calls to avoid salespeople or political poll takers. But right now, I'm too happy to care who it is. Hello?
Hi, Mom.
I frown. Who's this? Silence on the other end for several seconds.
Mom, it's me, Nancy.
I'm not sure why this woman is calling me Mom, but I search my memory, trying to recall if I know a Nancy. There's a nurse named Nancy that I've worked with a few times when I've been on nights. But this isn't her. She's in her late 60s, and this woman's young, in her 20s maybe. Besides, why would that Nancy call me Mom? Sorry, you must have the wrong number. I pull the phone away from my ear, intending to disconnect, but before I can, the woman Nancy speaks hurriedly.
Is this some kind of joke, Mom? Please tell me it is, because if it's not, you're scaring me.
I should disconnect anyway. If there's anyone joking here, it's her. But I don't. Instead, I put the phone back to my ear. I'm sorry, but not only don't I know a Nancy, I don't recognize your voice. The pause is longer this time, and I think she's ended the call, but then she says,
Do you remember the hospital where you work?
I'm not sure what disturbs me more, that she knows where I work, or the forced calm in her voice, which does a poor job of masking the fear underneath. Yes? Go there. Right now. Tell them you're having trouble remembering things. I'll book a flight and be in Ohio as soon as I can. I'll call Laura.
She breaks off.
Do you remember Laura?
My silence is answer enough.
I'll call her, and I'm sure she'll come too. She's close enough to drive, and she'll get there first. Don't worry, Mom. You're going to be okay, all right? Everything is going to be okay. I love you.
She sounds on the verge of tears as she disconnects. I hold the phone to my ear a moment longer before returning it to my purse. This incident is as strange as anything I experienced in Pandora's. And while I have no idea who Nancy or, Laura? There was something about Nancy's parting words. Something about the way she repeated the word okay that chilled me. Whoever these girls are, they must be part of the memory Mr. Lim removed from my mind. I wanted that memory gone. I needed it desperately. My continuing sanity depended on it. So, maybe I shouldn't think about this too closely. I shouldn't try to recover that which I worked so hard to be free of. To hell with the massage and the margarita, and to hell with the hospital. I needed to go home. Now. I pressed down on the gas and prayed I wouldn't catch the attention of any cops on the way. A couple of hours later, I'm sitting in Pandora's parking lot again. It isn't as full as it was earlier, but the vehicles here now are just as weird as the ones before. I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to find the restaurant again. That once my wish was granted, the place would go back to wherever it came from, never to return. But I found it again, and on the first try. I've been sitting here for 5 minutes, gripping the steering wheel and looking straight ahead. Once I got home, I checked my phone and found contacts for both Nancy and Lauren. No last names, though. I checked my text messages and found conversations with both women. The latest exchanges were about their upcoming spring breaks. The schools didn't do their spring breaks during the same week. Lauren's was first, and Nancy's was the week after. The three of us wanted to take a cruise, but we were having trouble figuring out the logistics of the trip. I have no memory of these texts. There are saved voicemails from both girls, too. I didn't recognize either of their voices. There are pictures on my phone, most of which are of one or two young women who I assume are Nancy and Lauren. I'm in some of those pictures, but I have no memory of them being taken. I checked my social media accounts and found more pictures of them, along with their comments on my posts. I checked out their profiles, went through their pictures, saw bits and pieces of two lives I know nothing about. I saw both girls are connected to Jacob on social media, and they share his last name, Haynes. That was my last name, too. I didn't change it after the divorce. It seemed like too much of a hassle, and Jacob and I don't have hard feelings towards each other. Well, not too many hard feelings. I haven't spoken with him in years, not since he remarried. But I'm tempted to call him now and ask him about Nancy and Lauren, if they really are who I fear they are. I have others I could call too. My own mother, my brother. But there's no point. I understand now what happened, if not exactly why. And I know what I need to do. I get out of my car, and I head into the restaurant once more. Owned is still standing behind the counter, and the place still smells like a chemical factory. The dining area isn't as full as it was earlier. The people that are here are strange. Just like... Mr. Lim is sitting at the same table. A new mound of crumbled wrappers in front of him, and scattered piles of them on the floor around his feet. He has only one sandwich left, but he seems to be in no hurry to eat it. Maybe he's finally full. He holds on to the sandwich with both hands, almost as if he's cradling it. His jacket is still stained with rabbit blood, thick and wet. He's watching a woman use a butcher knife to cut off a man's balls on the TV. I'm so relieved he's here. I was afraid he might have left while I was gone. I then wonder if he ever leaves, or if he's always sitting there, devouring one sandwich after another, watching an endless parade of televised murder and mutilation, doing favors for people willing to pay his price. I head over to the table on the edge of panic. I don't have any memories of Nancy or Lauren, but now I believe I should have. And I'm horrified at what I must have lost, what I must have willingly given up. I don't know what I was thinking, and I don't care. I just want my memories back. But before I can speak, Mr. Lim turns to me with a smile that's almost, but not quite, mocking. No one realizes that when you remove one memory, all the others associated with have to go too. It's like a house of cards. You take one for the bottom and the entire structure collapses. You'd be surprised how many of my clients come back after they understand this, but I must say, you may have set the record for the fastest return visit. So, you could give them back? The memories? Of course I can. He sounds offended at first, but then he smiles again. Slowly this time. Slyly. But like I told you earlier, I don't work for free. He unwraps the sandwich, crumples the paper, and tosses it to the floor. He lifts the sandwich up for my inspection and removes the top bun to reveal a bloody hunk of raw meat sitting there. A very particular cut of meat. Well, it's hard to find a steady supply, he says, especially when you have an appetite like mine. I remember how during my first visit, when I told him Marcia had said something to me about him, he questioned my use of the word. Now, I know why. Marcia can type just fine, but she can't say anything. She went through the same ritual as I imagine most of Mr. Lim's customers do. If they want back what they so foolishly gave away. He replaces the top bun and gobbles the sandwich down. Afterward, he wipes away a splotch of crimson from his lips, which I now know for certain is not ketchup. And he then points to the counter. Owned holds a butcher knife that looks very much like the one wielded by the ball cutter on the TV. I think of how scared Nancy sounded on the phone, even though she fought so hard to sound calm. I think of Lauren, who even now is driving back to Ohio from Kentucky, worried sick that her mother had a stroke, or is suffering from early onset dementia. I'll see her soon. Nancy, too. And when I do, I may not be able to say, I love you, but I will hug them. hug them hard. I think they'll get the message. Most importantly, I'll remember them. Remember everything, the good times and the bad. I walk to the counter and stick out my tongue. Mond takes hold of the tip between a thumb and forefinger and pulls it taut. Then, without any change in her expression, she raises the knife and cuts. It hurts worse than the barbed wire around my ankle, but still not as bad as... Oh, I hear my girl's voices again. And as Owen heads back to the kitchen with her grisly prize, I smile with my empty mouth. Blood pouring over my chin and splattering onto the counter with a sound sweet as music.
Chilling tales for dark nights.